Chapter 51. In one of the several chambers at the peak of Elder's Respite, several important-looking guests arrived at the same time. Among them were Minerva, Darius, and many other magi from other elemental institutions. Standing already in the room was a skinny old man attending to the brown skin, face filled with white stripes was Magus Erica. She was wrapped from neck to toe with a cloth that seemed to glow, ever so slightly, leaving her head still visible. It didn't take long for more people to come in, but this entourage had a different aura surrounding them. As they entered the room and stood on the side, they were as still as a rock and seemed ready to welcome a person of great importance. When the last person walked in, all the sitting magi stood up and bowed along with the magi on the side. He was wearing a slightly different uniform from the rest that had entered, and a monocle on the left eye. He brushed his mustache as the magi in the room stood up in attention. The thin old man, attending to Magus Erica, still had his back facing the respected individual, which the other party didn't mind. The man with the monocle bowed and politely said to the thin old man, "Grand Magus Iver, we have just finished our investigation. I see we appreciate your help, Magister Leon. Let us wait a few moments more for Headmaster Altus Drayden to arrive." "Thank you, Grand Magus Iver," said Leon before heading back to the side. The skinny old man was the Plant Institute's chief instructor of this Magus Academy named Iver, while the man with the monocle was a magister named Leon sent from this world's government to investigate last night's events. The Magus Academy normally had their own people to do such things, but matters involving the elves, mankind's mortal enemy, this world's government tended to get involved. A few moments had passed, and the tapping of a stick against the wooden floor entered people's ears sitting in the room. That only meant one thing: the headmaster had arrived. He was a wrinkled, old man with a white beard spanning beneath his chest, and held a wooden stick as he walked. With it, everyone bowed deeply as soon as Altus Drayden, headmaster of the Magus Academy, entered the room except for Iver. The aura inside the chamber instantly became serious. Altus Drayden said with a calm voice, "You may take your seat, everyone." He went toward Iver and observed Magus Erica for a moment. "It looks like she'll recover soon. Your plant magic has always been a wonder, Iver." "Ah, it's just a simple new spell," said Iver while continuously channeling plant healing magic through the cloth. Altus laughed. He turned his head to the monocle man and said, "Magister Leon, what has your investigation resulted in?" Leon stepped forward and replied, "We have examined the place of battle and found some evidence of a chase. Based on the number of elves and orcs that had snuck here, we can safely assume that this is not a full-on attack but an off-the-book operation. We also have found a couple of orc corpses nearby, as well as a still unidentified elf." Altus looked thoughtful before responding. "It seems too much for the elves to come into one of our Magus Institutes deep in human territory just to chase an unidentified elf, right?" "We agree, Headmaster Altus. We suspect the elf who had been chased must be a person of importance, since the entity that came after was August, the Red Demon," answered Magister Leon. Interesting. Is August the one who fought our instructing magi?" said Altus, looking at Minerva, Darius, as well as others, who appeared to be still injured based on how they had glowing bandages wrapped around on some parts of their bodies like Magus Erica. They appeared embarrassed because they unconsciously couldn't look straight into the headmaster's eyes, but Altus waved it off by saying, "Well, no need to feel ashamed. Fighting with the Red Demon with no casualty is already a feat by itself." "About that, Altus, we do have some casualties. A few acolytes had died during the quest master Grom issues every year," said Iver, finally stopping his plant healing spell on Magus Erica. He took a seat afterwards. "Allah, poor children." Magister Leon spoke once more. "We also have a report that one of the surviving acolytes mentioned the elves had taken captive on one of our acolytes." Altus' brows furrowed and asked, "And why did they do that?" "We don't have information on that yet. The surviving girl acolyte who had shared this information didn't mention anything else other than finding the elf's corpse and escaping with one of our acolytes. Hence, We are dubious of the whole event. Altus stooped silence for a while, seemingly thinking of possibilities. After trying to make sense of things, he sighed and said, Magister Leon, please update me if you find new information. Magister Leon bowed and said, Understood, Headmaster Altus. We will inform you of any updates we find. After Magister Leon said his piece, his group of men in uniform walked out of the room and left. Headmaster Altus then turned to the Magi left and said, The war has arrived at the Academy's front doors, even though we are so far behind the war zone. I hope everyone can always remember to be cautious, but remember our main role is to instruct these new young acolytes. They are the future protectors of humankind. Headmaster Altus thought for a little while and continued, Tomorrow morning, I'd like to see those who are most talented among the first years. Yes, Headmaster Altus. They all replied at the same time before leaving Altus and Iver. Altus stepped closer to Iver and said, We rarely see these days, Iver. How's your cultivation? Have you had any improvement? Iver laughed to himself and replied, Not really, Altus. That's too bad. We need you on the front line, and if you have gone to the war like the others, you would have improved much faster, said Altus with a low voice. Iver simply smiled and replied, You know everyone has their own purpose, Altus. Mine is here in Elder's Respite. I've heard that Zenoia has been enlightened today. Is that true? Altus nodded and said, I hope she manages to break through as a supreme magus. That'll turn out to be the best for the sake of humanity. Chapter 52. Emery tried to travel on his own but met some mishaps on the way. The Golden City was so huge that it cost him an hour looking for a portal back home. Fortunately, at his wit's end, a kind stranger guided him to a nearby portal, which brought him to the large plaza. It was already late afternoon when he had returned to their private quarters, and the others weren't there with the exception of Julian. Emery sat by the table and waited for Julian to speak, who seemed to be in deep thought. Hey, welcome back, Emery. Can you tell me what your country is like? I've only heard and read the stories but haven't had a chance to visit there yet, asked Julian, looking at the endless expanse of clouds covered with the orange tint of the setting sun by the window. What are the stories you've heard? Said Emery, drinking a glass of water. Well, to sum it up, the story said that Britain is an undeveloped, barbarian country. Emery thought for a moment, then answered, Not sure about undeveloped, but a barbaric country description seems accurate. The two talked about Britons and Romans, about their cities, the mountains, culture, and the people. Whenever the topic was back to the Britons, Emery couldn't help but think of a certain woman whom his heart pains every time. The room became silent as he also realized Julian was also deep in thought. You know, after all that I have seen the last 7 days, I realized our world is nothing compared to this one, let alone the other planets, which civilization also thrives. Rome is a huge empire, strong and powerful, but even if we put all the greatest minds, advancements against the other worlds out there, I realized we're just a tiny, insignificant dot. The door hissed open with Clee walking in. She saw the boys talking. What are you boys talking about? You look so serious, she said with a cheerful tone. Chumo and Thrax soon followed. Chumo gave Emery a smile while Thrax said, Hey, good job. Emery, I just heard the news. Of course he'd succeeded. Never doubted him for a second, said Clee before finally noticing the new uniform Emery was wearing. She looked at him from head to toe. Is that the apprentice uniform from the Path of Crafting? Wow, it looks good on you. The rest hadn't noticed it, but when Clee pointed it out, all of them crowded Emery. Julian, even though he didn't participate in checking out Emery's new uniform, seemed to have taken his mind out of the topic they were discussing earlier. He smiled and said, Friends, I just realized we have an excellent team composition, complementing each other's strengths and weaknesses. In future battles, I am confident that I can hold the front line, while Clee and Thrax are our main offensive powers. Thrax, I don't like you, but I applaud your skills in battle. Our friend from the east, Chumo, lands a versatile role, who can strike or protect us in the shadows, while Emery is our friend in the back, ideally supporting us with spells or other crafting roles that best helps us in the upcoming battles. I believe that if we want to pass the coming years, we must work together. Hear, hear, the rest shouted. The atmosphere instantly became infectious with excitement. In the back of Emery's mind, he didn't like being assigned the support role. He had always wanted to be like his father, fighting on the front line. Considering his current skills set though, he couldn't help but agree to what Julian had claimed. A support role would be the next best thing for him. Emery stared at Julian. Deep inside him, he also wished to be like him. Reliable, enthusiastic, and a passionate, radiating person. The way Julian spoke his mind on top of being charismatic somehow made Emery want to have a talent like Julian. He took a step back and observed this small gathering of people. Julian, Klee, Chumo, and even Thrax, the crudest of them all, were extraordinary individuals. He felt little of himself thinking these friends of his were high and above him. However, was that a reason to shy away and lurk in the corner? Was that a reason to feel small and insignificant? No, it wasn't. Emery's heart began to pump harder as he joined the joyous atmosphere. He smiled and determinedly to strive, improve, and prove himself. He was no longer that little boy hiding behind a cupboard. He swore to himself he'd be strong. Everyone, this is perfect timing, exclaimed Klee. Let's create a pact and treasure this moment. She grabbed a cup that had a thin stem and a V-shaped container. She poured wine into it and raised it up before taking a small knife and gently cut on her palm. The moment her palm bled, she made her blood drip into the cup and lay down the knife on the table. A blood oath, haha, you are more interesting than I thought. Julian whipped the knife and did the same thing. He laid down on the table and said to Thrax, "What about you, uncultured barbarian?" "Humph, a cup with a pig's blood in it. I guess that doesn't sound too bad," said Thrax. "Oh, you better enjoy it. That's the only blood you'll get from me," Julian said after Thrax did the same thing. The two were back again arguing, but joyous air remained the same. Chumo silently followed suit as well as Emery the last. "Let's make an oath to friendship," said Klee. Julian raised the cup and added, "I would like to add strength to protect our world. What do you think?" Everyone nodded. Klee then continued, "I have opened up every path which is in the sky and which is on earth. I am noble, I am a spirit, I am equipped. Oh, all you gods and all you spirits, prepare a path for us." Klee sipped from the cup and passed it on to Emery, who also drank, and then to next. The cup traveled from one hand to the other, and when they were all done, Emery promised to himself to never forget this moment forever. He now had brothers and a sister in bonds. They finished the rest of the night with jokes and laughter, until Emery's body and mind finally forced him to rest. Tomorrow morning was the last day they all would meet at the Magus Academy. Until next time. Chapter 53. The first light of the next morning arrived, but the 5 young acolytes from Earth were already awake and started getting ready to head toward the grand assembly. They were back to the first place they had seen ever since entering this world 7 days ago. 10,000 acolytes filled the ground in front of the purple glowing tower. It was crowded with various youngsters. Some were taller by more than a head, and some were smaller, half the size of an average teenager. Some even have horns and tails. However, they were all in fact humans. In the middle of the crowd, Emery scouted the surrounding and found a particular woman with pale skin, long hair reaching just below her bottom, and snake-like eyes. He approached her and said, "Hey Silva, good to see you here." Emery was quite sure he had seen her smiling at first glance, but instantly returned to her usual demeanor. "Of course I am here. What kind of a question is that?" she said, looking away from him. "Haha, sorry, I'd like to introduce you to my friends," he replied. "Friends?" she asked, tilting her head. He looked behind him, only to realize he had gotten separated with the others. "I wonder if anyone would like to be friends with you. You will become a problem to them." "Haha, I probably am," Emery answered, scratching his head. Silva appeared as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. She shook her head and said, "Please don't stand near me too much. I don't want to get your bad luck rubbing off me again." Before Emery could answer, a soft hand grabbed his arm, and the beautiful black-haired, bronze-skinned beauty was there. "There you are, what are you doing here?" asked Klee. "Oh, perfect timing. Let me introduce you to a friend I met the other day. This is a fellow acolyte." From our class, Silva is her name. I was with her during the incident I told you yesterday morning. Emery replied. Ah, so it's you. Thank you for helping, Emery. My name's Clee. Surprisingly, Silva only gave a nod and didn't reply. The air between the three suddenly became awkward, so he knew he had to do something. Before he could break the ice, however, Clee started, dragging him back to his group. Okay, nice to know you, Silva. Let's go, Emery. The others are waiting for us. Chumo found a place where we can see the podium better. Clee pulled Emery away from Silva, who now had her back facing them. They arrived at a slightly elevated ground and reunited with Julian, Chumo, and Thrax. Good, you're here. It's going to start soon, said Julian, pointing with his chin at the numerous magi standing on the podium above a giant row of stairs. Just like the first day, an old man with a white beard and walking stick stood in front with his eyes seemingly closed. That's the Magus Academy headmaster, Altus Drayden, said Clee, elbowing Emery. Headmaster Altus opened his eyes, and the whole area became surrounded with an overbearing pressure. The chattering of the first-year acolytes stopped at once, and they all twisted their necks in the direction of the old man. Headmaster Altus struck the floor he was standing on, and his booming voice entered everyone's mind. I would like to congratulate everyone who has finished their first year in our Magus Academy. After speaking, a large crystal-like object floated above the podium and listed names of people that had a corresponding number on the said ranking from 1 to 100. These are the rankings of the top 100 acolytes based on the information provided by the symbol on your palms. It showed us the growth of each individual in the past 7 days, Headmaster Altus said. Clee gasped as her field of view showed a notification of her ranking. Oh my, I'm ranked 91. Congratulations to become top 100 acolyte. You receive 1,000 contribution points. Rank 91 gets this many contribution points. How much do you think the top 10 gets? Exclaimed Clee. The giant crystal showed the names as well as the acolyte ranking of the top 5 people in large writings. 1. Zach Acolyte rank 5. 2. Trish Acolyte rank 5. 3. Akira Acolyte rank 5. 4. Tobias Acolyte rank 5. 5. Vita Acolyte rank 4. The headmaster continued. Our Magus Academy not only rewards those who have talent in the elements, but also rewards those who have talent in the path of combat. The names in the crystal shifted to the side, while another set of names on the opposite side. Some names overlapped, indicating that person both had talent in the elements and physical combat. 1. Damien Acolyte rank 4. 2. Tori Acolyte rank 4. 3. Fixton Acolyte rank 3. 4. Vita Acolyte rank 4. 5. Zerui Acolyte rank 3. Emery read the names and was impressed at those who had managed to break through rank 5 and rank 4 on both lists. As far as he knew, all youths here were of the same age, and they were all talented, unlike how he had struggled to break through to rank 2. It wasn't only Emery who shared the sentiment, but the other students too. They were in particular staring at the sole name that reached the top 5, Vita. Yes, I got it, Thrax roared, lifting his fists in the air. Congratulations on becoming one of the top 100 fighters. You receive 500 contribution points. Good for you. What's your rank? Clee asked while searching for Thrax's name. 99, Thrax proudly said. Ha, you just barely passed, that's all, said Julian, smirking. Oh yeah, then what rank are you, Roman? Probably at the bottom 100, I presume. Thrax laughed as he placed his fists on his hip. No way, I never mind. Julian didn't continue after that and decided to stay quiet after checking his rank through the symbol on his hand. From the looks of it, his ranking was probably not that great. The acolytes that managed to reach the top 10 were then called to the podium and given a special reward. After that, the giant floating crystal again shifted its list and showed a couple of names. This time, they were names of people who failed the first test. Emery, read the name Fatty. It is, however, sad to see some of you didn't make it. As for those who have passed, I hope all of you will work even harder than you have this year. We are looking forward to having you back. Emery's mind was on a different topic though. Fatty being in the mouth of that monster and Topper's melting face. From the way Headmaster Altus had spoken of them, It seemed like dying in. The world of Magi was a more common occurrence than his world. If so, then he had to make sure he wouldn't be just a number in the years he would be here. Hey, aren't the names of the people you worked with are listed there? A voice said next to him. He turned around and saw Silva walking toward him. Silva, oh, yes, Fatty is a first year like me. He's on the list. Emery confusedly stared at Silva. What are you looking at? I only came here because this spot has a better view, Silva said. He tried to remember the view from where Silva was and this. For Emery, there were no differences. They all served the same purpose anyway. The four people finally noticed Silva's presence as she talked to Emery. Aren't you the person who had the highest battle and spirit power in the class examination? Said Thrax, scanning Silva from head to toe. Right, Silva, these are my friends that I wanted to introduce to you. We're all from the same world. Emery presented them one by one, and mentioned the same thing he had mentioned to Klee earlier. To the others, Julian appeared friendly as usual, Chumo still silent as ever. Klee, though, didn't seem to be herself as she joined Chumo in silence. Thrax, however, approached Silva and said, I wish to challenge you to battle sometime. Silva crossed her arms and said, all of you came from a lower world. You should worry about surviving there before wishing to fight me. Thrax answered confidently, with the strength that I have right now, no one in my country can defeat me. Silva placed a palm on her forehead before sighing. You people don't know anything. Care to enlighten us with your wisdom then? Said Klee. Just watch, you'll soon see, Silva said. After hearing Silva's mysterious remarks, Emery instinctively felt things wouldn't be good for them. And at the moment he thought of that, Headmaster Altus raised his staff, and an energy glowed brightly. Almost every youth's palm burned, but it didn't last long. Emery focused on the symbol on his hand and read over his status. Emery Ambrose. Battle power 16, 11. Spirit power 30, 20. Restriction spells has been placed. Chapter 54. Almost everyone, specifically the youths that were classified as citizens from a lower class world, felt a burning sensation on their palms, lasting for only a moment. Emery's field of view was hijacked with a large notification that said the following. Restriction spells has been placed. Confused, he looked at the others only to find out they had the same expression. Emery, are you seeing this too? Restriction has been placed, asked Julian, dumbfounded. Emery nodded, as well as Chumo, Thrax, and Klee. They all allowed the same information to be shown to each other. Thrax. Battle power 25, 16. Spirit power 33, 23. Julian. Battle power 15, 11. Spirit power 34, 24. Chumo. Battle power 16, 11. Spirit power 35, 26. Klee. Battle power 11, 8. Spirit power 42, 37. Both their spirit and battle power had been drastically reduced. What is going on? A youth from the crowd asked. What is this? I can't even cast a spell, cried Klee, waving her hand and repeatedly reciting the names of her spells. Silva, on the other hand, looked unperturbed. What is going on, Silva? Emery asked. Silva sighed, seemingly not interested in explaining at all, but did so anyway. Acolytes that arrive here from a lower world have always been given a powerful restriction spell upon their return. Why, what for? Emery pressed the question. I don't know nor care enough to know the whole reason behind it, but from what I've heard, it's to ensure balance of the Acolytes' world once they return. After all, they don't want a civilization to advance too rapidly with the help of other world civilizations. Silva lifted her hand and was able to make roots grow like the one from her entangle spell. How are you? Silva cut off Klee mid-sentence and said, Since I come from a higher realm, I am not affected by the restriction spells. As for you all, the rules are different. From what I've heard, though, you may still cast the spell, at least part of it, as long as you have full mastery over it. Julian raised his voice from his otherwise calm demeanor. Bullshit. Everything here is beyond our world. If that is the case, ours will be a lower world for who knows how long. Watch your tongue, Silva said. Her cold stare brought goosebumps to everyone in her surrounding. If you don't like what you're hearing, take it upon the headmaster yourself," she added. Emery was surprised just as everyone. This was a first for them to see Julian lash out like that. "So sorry about that, Silva. Can you tell us more about what you know?" Emery interjected. Silva snorted and crossed her arms. Her brows were furrowed, but she obliged him. "Listen, it isn't only your strengths that are restricted. Your mouth should be the same in case you thought about telling anyone of this world. All of the belongings you have accumulated here will stay here until the next time you come back to this world." Emery and his friends did gain some items during the past 7 days in the Magus Academy, and these items would surely be beneficial to bring back. He had the 6 green essence potions left in his bag, but since he had convinced himself it wasn't his anyway, it would be best for him not to carry it around. Emery wanted to ask a few more questions when Headmaster Altus Drayden tapped his wooden stick once again. The purple tower behind the old man glowed magnificently while he said, "In lieu of the rules given by the government to the Academy, all acolytes from the lower worlds have been given restriction. Be wary of the restriction that has been placed for you, since there are punishments if you decide not to follow the rules in place. This is for your own good, the world, and humankind." Emery felt an unusual trust toward the speaking headmaster. He wasn't sure if it was due to a spell or the old man's powerful aura. The moment this old man said a single word, all complaints from the fuming acolytes came to a halt, and all was silent once more. The headmaster continued speaking. "Remember to always be diligent in improving your understanding of the elements. You will all be sent back in a short hole, and I will see you all back next year." Julian appeared to have calmed down now, but the way he had his fist clenched said otherwise. He asked Silva, "How can we end this restriction?" She ignored Julian, which made Emery butt in, making her finally answer Julian's inquiry. "Didn't you hear me and the headmaster earlier? Sigh. If you really are determined, then it'll be after you reach a certain rank in the academy, or until your realm is stronger than the spell itself." Julian deeply breathed out and released his fist. Both he and Emery thanked Silva for providing valuable knowledge. Just make sure you return next year and return the favor," she said to Emery just before her body glowed and a blinding beam of light struck her directly from the sky. Emery opened his eyes, and Silva was no longer there. It didn't take long for the same thing to occur at the other acolytes around them. Some appeared scared, but some relaxed. This must be the transportation method, so Emery thought this was the time to say goodbye. He stared at his 4 friends, Julian, Thrax, Chumo, and Klee. He said as he waved his hand, "Take care, guys. We will see each other next year." The same ray of light first struck his hand. A buzzing sound rang in his ears. He felt his whole body floating, and then the large beam of light struck his whole being. Shortly after, Emery opened his eyes. The blue sky entered his vision as the musky smell of the grass and earth entered his nostrils. The rustling of the trees, the rushing river current beside him all welcomed him back. "I have finally returned," he said. Chapter 55. Everything felt like a dream as Emery stared at the blue canvas of the sky while observing the flocks of birds flying freely. The cool breeze hit his face along with the tiny splashes of water from the river beside him. He got up and made way underneath a full-grown tree that provided shade from the scorching sun. Looking back at the river again, Emery watched as the little salmon swam against the rushing flow, which was a sign that autumn was near over the horizon. It was a refreshing feeling as some birds overhead flew down and landed on Emery's shoulder. The past 7 days indeed was just surreal to consider, however. The almost transparent circle with a vertical strike-through line on his palm told him otherwise. He focused his thoughts on the symbol, and what happened next confirmed everything had indeed happened. Emery Ambrose, Battle Power 16, 11, Spirit Power 30, 20, Restriction spells added. He remembered Gwen's coming of age was in the early summer, and the fateful night was the next day. After returning, though, it seemed like a couple of months already passed, or maybe a year. He didn't know, but he would surely have to ask someone later. Emery finally noticed his clothes. It was still the same clothing he had worn before he had been transported. Oddly enough, though, it was squeaky clean. Taking his mind off irrelevant questions, he followed the river upstream, passed through the grove of trees, and arrived at whatever was left of the burned-down Ambrose estate. There were some structures barely standing, but all that was left were rubble and soot and ashes. The whole place was deserted, except for the black crows and burned corpses of the peasants who were being consumed by terrible insects. Emery didn't cover his nose nor hide his face. He vowed to remember all of this and paint it deep in his mind. He walked past where the smithy, the bakery, the inn, and the stable should have been. Finally, he arrived at the elevated portion where the Ambrose estate had stood proudly. And like the others, it was burned to the ground. The rubble were everywhere. Emery passed by the burnt and rotting corpses of his families, servants, guards, and knights totaling 12 people. At the section of the house where the cellar was, a burnt pillar blocked his way. That didn't stop him, though, from putting all of his strength and successfully moving it to the side enough for 2 people to fit. There he saw it, the remains of his father surrounded by a couple marauders' corpses. They were unburned but rotting. The stench tried hard to overpower him, but he moved forward and kept his face as straight as he could, taking everything in as he neared his father's corpse. He knelt on one knee before his father's body, which he now barely recognized. His heart was screaming, begging to let it all out, but biting his lips and clenching his knuckles until it was white was all that Emery had done. In silence, Emery picked up a cloth from the cupboard where he had hid and wrapped his father's rigid body with it. It took Emery a couple of minutes before being able to successfully make sure every part of the body was covered. Then Emery carried him with his back, taking small little steps and making sure his father's head wouldn't hit the pillar he had moved earlier. He got out of the cellar but was already sweating big droplets from his forehead. Emery didn't care, though, as he continued heading toward the yard, not far from where the house was. In that quiet place a headstone already stood. It read, "Dearest wife, mother of Ambrose." Emery slowly put down his father's corpse before the headstone. He said, "Mother, I believe father is by your side now. He had missed you a lot. Whenever he talked about you, his eyes glowed. I remember him telling me you were the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, and when your eyes met for the first, he had known it was you he wanted to be with forever. He loved you so dearly, and the result of your love for each other bore fruit through me. I don't blame you. Here I am right now before you, wishing both of you eternal happiness with your reunion." He hadn't noticed it, but tears were rolling down on his way here. Emery lifted the shovel he had dragged from the cellar and started digging a hole beside his mother's headstone. He went into the hole first before pulling his father's body and making it fall on him. He crawled out of the way and climbed back up, careful not to step any part of his deceased father. Slowly, Emery filled the hole and buried his father. "Father, I will make you proud. You and mother are watching over me from the beyond, and I hope both of you will see that I am not that weak boy anymore." Emery then placed a pile of smooth rock he had found by the river on top of his father's burial ground. After that, he again dug 12 more holes in the side yard and began burying the bodies of the residents of the Ambrose estate. Even though they might be just servants, in Emery's eyes, they were like his uncles and aunts and friends and teachers. The sky on the horizon was turning orange when he had finished. He knew he couldn't stay in this place, but he looked for whatever was left in the burnt mansion and found a small axle and a knife. Nothing of value remained in the rubble. Otherwise, Emery was getting ready to leave when the hooves of horses started getting nearer. He didn't move on the spot, though, and waited for it to arrive. 2 horsemen approached him, and one of them said, "Ha, that's the boy all right. I told you he's still alive," the other said. Emery had his back facing them, but he could recognize these 2 were the marauders chasing him that night. "So, little boy, care to tell us where you've been? Probably hiding with the damned croutons, weren't you? Kekek, we've waited too long, but the boss will be happy. Come on, let's not waste more time. My crotch is itching for the newly arrived whores." Emery turned to face them and took out a wooden axe from his waist, his eyes cold. Chapter 56. Under the glow of the setting sun, The two marauders descended their horses and started discussing how their boss would reward them handsomely once they brought him Emery's head, the solid proof that the final Ambrose and Cruton kid had died. They talked as if they hadn't noticed the boy in front of them stared at them with eyes full of intent to kill, while holding an axle. Emery listened intently to every word they said, but all he had gotten was that their master was male, the rest were about women and money. He needed to find out who and why they had massacred everyone in the place he had called home. Picking up a stone from the ground, Emery threw it to the noisy marauder and hit straight the forehead. The companion laughed and said, "Wahaha, you got hit by a boy. Look at you bleeding, ha-ha-ha." The first marauder punched the other and said, "I'll kill you for laughing at me. Huh, do you want to fight herein? Hey, are the two of you just going to stand there or what?" Emery exclaimed. The two stopped what they were doing and watched Emery before looking back at themselves and started laughing again. "Wow, look, the boy is raring for a fight. Are you sure this is the boy we are looking for?" "The boy I knew ran away crying so fast like a headless chicken, ha-ha-ha." True. Well, it don't matter though. I'd rather bring back a wrong head than going back empty." Emery stayed silent, waiting for the marauders to make a move. He already had them riled up. The initiative was his, and he was no longer the same person he was 7 days ago. It was better that they underestimated him. And even though these two brutes were surely nothing compared to the orcs when he held up his axe, only then he noticed his grip was trembling. The two people saw how Emery's axe was shaking and laughed even louder. The bleeding marauder stepped forward and grasped a butcher's knife from the horse. He said, "I'll take care of the boy. You just stay there and make sure he doesn't run." "Whatever, make it quick," said the other one. "Come here, boy. I'll make you wish you were never born." Emery's whole body was now shaking. He held the axe's handle with both hands and took a deep breath. After breathing out, the trembling stopped and he came to a realization. He made a wicked smile along with the heavy pounding of his heart against his chest. He wasn't afraid, rather he was too excited to get revenge for the people he had just buried. "Smiling are you now? Then let's see if you'll smile after this." The marauder dashed forward, but so did Emery. Surprised by Emery's speed, the marauder barely dodged the incoming axe, causing him to stagger. Not wanting to waste this opportunity, Emery made another swing straight at the marauder's face. A clashing of the metals ensued, for the marauder had managed to regain balance at the last moment and block Emery's axe. The marauder's face was full of shock. Emery's speed, arm strength, seemed no less than him. In fact, the boy was even slightly faster and stronger than him. An adult, full-grown man. "Boy, how? Hey, stop playing around. It's getting dark soon, I want them whores." The marauder facing Emery simply stayed silent. Of course, he'd be too ashamed to ask for help against a 15-year-old scrawny boy. His expression now turned serious and used two hands to push with all his strength against Emery's axe, making them jump back at the same time. He charged once more and put his full weight behind the butcher's knife. But the boy was able to parry every slash he made. "Since you're taking your sweet time, I'll just take a piss. Be back in a bit, just shout when you're finished playing with the kid," the marauder's companion said, heading toward a tree. The marauder, whose forehead now stopped bleeding, popped a vein and bled again, looking more pissed than earlier. Emery noticed how this man opened his mouth but refused to say anything again. The man in front of him was no stronger than a level 2 training puppet by the combat institution, even though he could tell there were many gaps in the marauder's attack, and he could end this farce earlier. Unfortunately, he was holding an axe wherein he had no experience, unlike using a sword. When this marauder's companion went behind the tree, Emery knew he had to end this now then. Later, after all, there were 2 threats, and Emery already had his hands full with just one. If the other one finally realized how his friend was actually having a hard time against him, it would be the end of Emery. Emery calmed himself and recalled the level 3 swordsmanship, along with the lessons from his father. Fully focused, Emery could see each movement and predict his opponent's next step. He dodged out of the way and then blood splattered on the ground. The marauder shouted for his sword hand was cut off by a boy. "So you're finished having fun, are you?" The marauder's companion returned, his whole attention was solely on adjusting his pants. "You shitter, help me, damn it!" The marauder roared while gripping his handless arm with the other. Emery swiftly picked up the fallen sword and thrust it in between the man's chest and shoulder. "Asshole, get over here and kill this son of Allah." Emery twisted the blade. He said, "Stay there or I'll end his life." The marauder's companion finally realized what was going on as he stared in disbelief at the situation. The surprise didn't last though, as he responded with a smile, "So the boy got lucky. I can't believe you lost against a milk drinker, brother. I'm telling you he's—" "Stop, I say, or I'll cut his head off." "Kid, I don't believe you. You ain't have the guts." Chapter 57. The sun had set on the horizon, leaving a purplish sky filled with peeking stars. Night wasn't far behind, hence Emery had to press for answers from these murdering bastards. "Asshole, get over here and kill this son of Allah." He twisted the pierced blade in between the marauder's chest and shoulder. Emery said with a cold voice to the marauder's companion, who was withdrawing a sword from the horse, "Stay there, or I'll kill him." "So the boy got lucky. I can't believe you lost against a milk drinker, brother," said the marauder, not even hesitating to walk closer. "Stop, I said, or I'll cut his head off." "Kid, I don't believe you. You ain't have the guts," said the marauder's companion with a wicked smile. "You fucker, I'll get you for this." "Grala, stop, please." "No more," begged the kneeling marauder. "Come on, I dare you." The marauder's companion again challenged Emery. As Emery heard how the other continued pleading, he became hesitant. Emery convinced himself he needed to know who was the person that ordered the massacre on the Ambrose estate. He had to be ruthless. He had to be strong to keep inflicting pain and kill this man, but in the back of his head he knew that was just an excuse. Even though he had killed an orc, it was akin to slaying an animal in self-defense, but this was killing a helpless human. He stopped twisting the blade. "Tell me who sent you," he demanded the kneeling marauder. "Just as I thought. A kid acting tough. Let me show you how to cut a head." He then threw a knife, which Emery barely dodged, and a sword at his friend who was kneeling. "Pick it up, you moron." Emery turned over the axe's blunt side and struck Marauder's helmet, rendering him unconscious. Fighting with two adult marauders was something he wouldn't be able to deal with right now. He pulled out the sword and got ready to parry the incoming blow from the charging marauder. "Your kind don't belong in this world, Cruton. Die." Emery blocked the attack and started clashing with the marauder. His fighting capability had indeed doubled using a sword, however. This man was actually more adept in sword fight than the previous man. After exchanging blows several times, both jumped back and the marauder's companion expression turned serious. "How is this possible?" The disbelief on his face, however, was immediately replaced with a mad smile. "Don't matter. Though, a kid who won't take a life doesn't worry me one bit." He charged again, and this time his slashes were getting wilder. Emery blocked and attacked in return, taking advantage of wide gaps he could see in the timing of the marauder's swings. He managed to wound the man in several body parts, however, the raging slashes didn't stop, and finally Emery was starting to get pushed back. The marauder paused for a moment, but then a sharp object thrust Emery's back. Emery hastily twisted his body, but blood still splashed onto the ground. "Did you have a wonderful dream, brother?" said the marauder. The burning pain on Emery's lower back was starting to throb as he stared at the now conscious marauder. If he still hesitated and wouldn't strike a decisive blow soon, then his life would be over. Emery breathed out again and steeled himself. It was his turn to throw the small axe in his other hand at the skillful marauder and charge at the same time. He ran past the still dazed marauder and issued a faint slash, which the other one fell for before letting out a spinning technique, and stabbed with the knife he had been keeping on his waist. The skillful marauder weakly raised his sword and tried to hack Emery one more time, but he obviously missed while grabbing his bleeding neck. He started convulsing, blood dripping from his mouth when Emery tilted the knife one last time. The marauder coughed blood on Emery's before falling on the ground. Emery wiped his face and heard the remaining marauder fastening steps. Emery quickly parried and then counter-slashed that heavily wounded the man. This attack makes Emery's wound become worse, and Emery's cough up blood. Emery walked to the man in a hunched manner and pointed the sword at him. He said, "Speak, or I'll slay you right now." "Please, please, I don't know anything," cried the marauder. "You're lying, tell the truth and I'll let you live." "Was it the phantomer?" Emery roared. This was the only explanation he could come up with. Everything pointed to the pig noble, but Emery needed proof. "I swear on my life, my lord, I truly don't know. We were just following the order of our chief. If anyone knows, it's him." "Then who is your chief? Where is he?" "The chief's name is Prodigy. Please let me go. I've told you all I know. I'll work an honest trade and leave this kingdom," the marauder said as he started crawling. Emery raised his sword when a shock of pain erupted from his lower back, making him drop the sword. He watched the marauder, who was now a couple of feet away, heading toward one of the horses. The marauder got up, grabbed one of the harnesses, when his back was slashed before dropping dead on the earth. Emery made his second kill. He inherently didn't want to, but did he really have a choice? Was there really any assurance that this marauder would live an honorable life, not return to his chief and tell him he was still alive? Emery had no answer. All he knew was that there were still people looking for him and wanted him dead. Emery first wrapped his lower back with a cloth he had taken from the bag the horse was carrying. There was nothing much of value inside it. Emery then rode the horse and proceeded to leave the area. He then realized his wounds are deeper than he thought. His vision was blurring and he was starting to feel cold. If Emery can get past this, he was determined next time not to hesitate to kill his opponent. Chapter 58. The rhythmic thudding of the horse's hooves was all that Emery could hear. His face pressed against the horse's mane. The rushing cold wind hit his shivering bones. He didn't know how many minutes had elapsed since he had been riding, but the sky above only showed darkness along with whatever light the stars shone. Slowly he was loosening his grip, his consciousness fading. "Tusk, tusk, tusk, stupid, stupid beyond help. You are naive, kid," whispered a familiar voice in Emery's mind. Emery wanted to lift his head, but it felt like his world was spinning. He responded, "I feel like I know you. Please help me. I have helped you once, but not this time. You need to learn. Whether you die right now, it's all up to chance," replied the voice. Who are you?" Emery asked, but the voice was silent until he fell from the horse's back and hit the ground. In the back of his mind, he thought to himself that this was the end for him, that he would have died for nothing and returned to nothingness. The thought, however, was subverted as he could someone's arm lifting him up. He tried to open his eyes, but all was a blur, vaguely seeing a silhouette of a man. There was another voice, a purr, here. That was all Emery could hear before he finally lost consciousness. Someone had found him. He fell into darkness once more. He couldn't move, but could feel someone rubbing his arm with a lukewarm cloth. Emery couldn't tell how much time had passed, and when he awoke, he first saw the rounded ceiling. Moving his eyes around, he realized he was in a house made with straw and wood. He then smelled a strong medicinal herb entering his nostrils. He tried to sit up, but a stinging pain reverberated throughout all his body, making him groan. "Granny, he is awake," said a young man entering the room. "Indeed he has. It seems the ancestral gods still have plans for him," said the old wrinkled woman, while stirring a cauldron, presumably where the scent of herbs came from. "What's your name?" the young man asked. However, Emery didn't speak. "Looks like he's still confused, Granny. Leave him be for now, Lanzo. He needs more rest," said the old woman as she placed down a green paste on the side. She patted Emery's head before gently saying, There, you're going to be fine." The old woman then had Lanzo lift Emery to the side. She examined Emery's wound and rubbed the green paste on it. Emery groaned once more. "The ancestral gods seem to have favored you with a healthy and strong body for your age. You should be better in a few days," said the granny. "Now lay him back down gently, Lanzo." After Emery had been laid down on his back, he opened his parched throat and roughly said, "Tea, thank you." The old woman smiled warmly, and Emery went back to sleep. A few days had passed, and based on the interactions he had with Lanzo and the old lady, she only seemed to want to be called Granny, nothing else. They fed him with more herbs, rubbed medicine, and changed the dressings on his wound. On Emery's fourth day, He was able to move but still not as lively as before. He limply got out of the hut with a walking stick and breathed in the fresh air of the settlement filled with similar, rounded huts made with straw and wood. Emery walked around, hoping to get his energy back soon. According to Lanzo, there were about 20 adults living here aside from the small children. Lanzo mentioned that the name of this settlement was Mitcher, which somewhat rang a bell in Emery's memory. It should be one of the few hundred small settlements south of Lioness Kingdoms, near the Ambrose estate. Emery continued strolling in the settlements and talked with the locals doing some crafts outside their huts. He asked various stuff, trying to make small talk, and surprisingly no one asked for his origins. When afternoon arrived, he finally understood why. A crowd was gathering in front of Granny's house, because the local hunters had brought another injured person they had found in the woods. Based on how the injured man's clothes appeared, he wasn't a local, and like Emery, the wrinkled old woman took the person in. As it turned out, Granny was also called a healer, a druid. Quite often the residents of the neighboring settlements or the hunters in the woods would bring an injured or sick person to her. So the locals of this settlement were used to not asking many questions, since the person being healed would usually leave anyway after they had fully recovered. Emery entered Granny's residence. She was preparing a new batch of medicine when Emery remembered that Lanzo went away this morning to gather more herbs in the forest. "Is there anything I can do to help, Granny?" asked Emery. "Ah, yes, dear. Could you kindly find me a couple of purple leaves from the herb garden? It's just a few walk beyond the large tree behind the hut. The dried ones here won't work for this man." Emery nodded. "Bring me the purple back leaves. It should be easy to spot with its large green leaves in the front, but its stem and back are colored purple. Get me dozens of them, will you, dear?" "I understand, Granny," replied Emery as he walked out of the hut, limping with his walking stick. Repay kindness with kindness, one of the lessons his father had instilled in him. Emery went behind the hut, and not long after he found the large tree in question. Behind the tree was a small garden, filled with various types of plants. Granny said it would be easy to spot, but Emery hadn't seen one before. He looked around, spending a good few minutes, until he found a plant with a purple stem. He turned it over and to confirm its back was also purple when the symbol on his palm slightly glowed, sending a notification in his mind. Universal Flora Level 1 activated. Analyzing Flora. Analyzation complete. Heart Flower Medicinal Herb Level 1. A list of the plant's properties, functions, and how to use it appeared in Emery's field of view. Chapter 59. Emery found the purple back leaves, and the moment he held it, the symbol on his hand glowed and issued a notification. Universal Flora Level 1 activated. Analyzing Flora. Analyzation complete. Heart Flower Medicinal Herb Level 1. His field of view was filled with a list of the herb's properties. Emery hadn't expected that a spell from the Magus world would be activated here. Even though he hadn't practiced this spell, Emery guessed it was probably due to this spell being exclusive to the Apothecary Institute, and full understanding of it wasn't necessary. He looked over the list and became astounded. With this knowledge and spell, Emery could find out the characteristics of a plant and the possible combination of recipes by finding some common ground. Emery wanted to use this more, but as of the moment, he had a more urgent priority. He carefully plucked a dozen of purple back leaves, heart flower, and carried it back to Granny, who was stirring the boiling cauldron. She asked him to grind the leaves in between two rocks until it was like a paste. Once Emery was done, he watched Granny scoop the paste, mixed it with the hot water, and applied it on the injured man. She said to Emery, "Thank you, dear, that's it for now. The rest are up to the gods." Emery took his leave, went back to the garden, and started examining the plants one by one. He touched a small black berry, but the symbol didn't react. He plucked it from the stem, still nothing. Trying to remember what he had done, he realized had been focusing intently while looking for the plant. This time, Emery cleared his thoughts and put his full attention on the plant. The symbol glowed and it said, "Unknown. Universal Flora Level 1 activated. Analyzing Flora. Analyzation complete. Elderberry Medicinal Herb Level 1. suitable for increasing resistance to poison. Emery then tried to examine the orange mushroom, growing on a tree bark on the ground. Universal Flora Level 1 activated analyzing flora. Analyzation complete. Rhizi mushroom medicinal herb level 1, suitable for increasing endurance and stamina. There was another mushroom that was all white. Universal Flora Level 1 activated analyzing flora. Analyzation complete unidentified medicinal herb unknown properties. There appeared to be some plants, despite how advanced the world where the Magus Academy was. But at the same time, Emery tried to understand how large the worlds were. There were other civilizations aside from theirs, so it was half expected. The following information that emerged from the tattoo took Emery by surprise. Register to database for 1 contribution point. A single contribution point seemed insignificant, but then he thought about it more. This garden already contained a lot of plants, and for sure the forest would have more. Emery recalled the parchment about medicinal herbs back home. That parchment had a ton of herbs listed. Unfortunately, it had probably been burned, but he could remember how some of them looked like. Getting excited at the prospect of how many contribution points he could possibly get, and the prospect of learning alchemy while not at the Magus Academy, Emery continued examining more plants. He believed that if he explored, he could get more contribution points, and these points could be used as capital to compete with other students at Magus Academy. A couple of minutes had passed, and so far, he had found at least 10 plants that were not on the so-called database. He also learned more about the plants and began to have ideas which ones were possibly compatible. After all the herbs had been examined, Emery went deeper into the woods and kept on touching whatever his hands could get on. Universal Flora Level 1 activated analyzing flora. Analyzation complete. Grass no medicinal property, insignificant for the database. Universal Flora Level 1 activated analyzing flora. Analyzation complete. Weed no medicinal property, insignificant for the database. Emery spent the entire afternoon and evening circling the forest and examining the trees and plants, but didn't make any more contribution points. It seemed that all the plants of value were already being grown in the garden. Not going to lie, he was indeed a bit disappointed, however, not discouraged. Britannia was so big that Emery believed there were still so many undiscovered plants. How many more would that be if he traveled further, for example, Rome? The possibilities were close to endless. The following day, the old lady mentioned he was recovering at an amazing pace. So, to return her kindness, Emery spent most of his time helping the old woman. It felt like he was back in his childhood days, wandering the forest, sowing and growing plants in the herb garden, and doing some alchemy. It was tiring and exciting for him. Emery, though, didn't forget to be more mindful this time. There were still people searching for him. Padraig, the chief of the marauders that attacked his home. Hence, if he didn't have to, he liked to keep to himself and not interact too much with the locals other than Lanzo and Granny. He continued learning alchemy from the old lady, understanding the spell and cultivating his understanding of the elements, specifically the plant element. Based on the last battle, he realized the battle power he had still wasn't sufficient to protect him. Rather, it was highly lacking. He needed spells to give him more of an advantage in case a fight breaks out, even if only a part of it would be available. Day after day of doing activities related to plants somehow deepened his understanding of the plant element. A week had passed when Emery finally had a breakthrough. Plant spirit initial stage mastered. Spirit power has increased by 1. After that breakthrough, Emery began to see the plants differently. Whenever he interacted with them, a faint energy seemed to flow in different parts of the plants. Finally, Emery can start to experience magic. At this moment, he wondered about his 4 friends from the academy. Chapter 60 Dongboyu, East China. On the night of a full moon, hundreds of maids and thousands of warriors had been gathered in a wide field of the royal palace. A ceremony was about to be held before a pagoda shrine. The drums started beating, and then a number of armored men wielding thin swords along with veiled women started a dance in front of the shrine. On the left side, There was a row of stairs leading to a balcony filled with cascading decorated chairs as well as lit lanterns. The royal family and ministers sat in accordance to their ranks, and some of the chairs were still empty, in particular the grandest chair that had the design of a golden dragon. On the opposite side of them was another balcony where dozens of shrine maidens as well as several eunuchs wearing white silk robes. The drum beat its last, and the dancing stopped when the booming bell was struck with the hanging log held by another eunuch. A woman dressed in a beautiful, silky white dress wearing a large veil came before the shrine that looked like a three-story pagoda and kneeled. The moment she kneeled, the two large pots sitting on the sides of the shrine burst out a large flame. She got up and walked to the right to make way for a man, wearing a black and gold overextended hat. He wore a red and gold robe that's strikingly more grandeur than anyone present. When the man arrived before the shrine, he put his hands together in a palm and fist before kneeling down. He raised his arms wide open and said, "Gods of the heavens, earth, wind, and water, I, the ruler of the prosperous kingdom of Dongbayu, give thanks for the 4 seasons, the fertility of the crops and the people. We owe you our blessed lands and offer a humble sacrifice to show our gratitude. Please give us another bountiful and protect Dongbayu's people for years to come." Everyone shouted, and the joyous festivity once more came alive. The drums started beating again. The dancers were back in front of the shrine, and food was coming out of the kitchen to be served at the numerous tables laid down inside and outside of the courtyard. The man in royal attire made his way up the flight of stairs on the left balcony and sat on the grandest chair. Tonight was a Thanksgiving festival in Dongbayu. As the feast was occurring, and the man in red finally noticed something amiss, rather someone amiss. "My queen, where is Chumo?" he asked the woman wearing a red and gold dress sitting beside him. "It seems he has left the royal palace once again, Your Majesty. No one can find him," she replied. "Probably having fun with the commoners again." He laughed. The night went on, and after everyone had their fill, the king took his leave along with the queen. The handmaidens slid open the royal chambers, and the king and queen went inside. Now that they were away from prying eyes, the queen said in disbelief, "How dare he didn't show up such an unfilial child? It's a sacred day." "Let us discuss this no further," said the king while 2 handmaidens were removing his heavy robes. "But Your Majesty, Chumo is a brat. It's unbefitting of him to act this way," she replied, also being stripped down, revealing a white dress underneath. "My queen, he's still my son, a prince, even if he was born from a concubine. He can do anything he wants. Why are you that displeased with him?" asked the king, now on his casual robes. "He's rude, spoiled, and incompetent. He acts as if he is a commoner. Then you shouldn't be worried since he wouldn't pose a threat to Diso or Yungpo for the crown." The queen stopped speaking when footsteps neared the royal chambers. "Your Majesty, Prince Diso and Prince Yungpo wish for an audience," said a eunuch behind the sliding door. "I'll meet them in the royal hall." "As you wish, Your Majesty," the eunuch replied, walking away. The king then headed toward the royal hall. As soon as he arrived, he noticed the 2 princes, along with a number of troops and ministers, and a disheveled-looking Chumo. "Father, he's a disgrace to the crown." After disappearing for more than a week, a servant found him sleeping in the wine room earlier. Chumo appeared confused. He had indeed been secretly sipping some wine before he had been transported to the Magus Academy. He tried to explain about him being in a different world, but no words came out of his mouth. Restriction to say any information related to the academy. He tried to say the same thought again and again, but he looked like a fool. Hence, in the end, Chumo made up a story that made no sense, wherein a lot of the ministers started whispering to themselves. "He's a drunkard, father. Look at him," said Diso, the crown prince. "He reeks of alcohol too," said Yungpo, the second prince, covering his nose. "I am not drunk, father. I confess that I had been drinking some wine, but—" "Silence," the king roared. "Bring me my sword." The murmuring grew louder while the queen and 2 princes exchanged knowing glances. The king received a sword and pointed it at Chumo. "Your Majesty, please calm down," said Chumo's mother, who had arrived barging in. Chumo couldn't bear the look of disappointment in his father's eyes. He kneeled before the king and bowed his head almost touching the floor. Inside him, he indeed felt guilty as he could also hear the whispering. He knew that a punishment was long due along with other things that he had done before, but his father had managed to give some excuse one way or another. Tonight, however, was an important night. Chumo steeled himself, ready to accept whatever punishment would be given, his life included, when the king threw the sword down beside Chumo and said, "Why, you are banished. Take this sword, and never set foot here again, until you have brought enough honor to the crown." "No, please, your majesty, I beg that you reconsider," said Chumo's mother, also kneeling on the ground. "That is my final decision," said the king, and Chumo couldn't help but notice the slight shaking of his father's voice at the end. After hearing the command, the queen and her two sons, the princes, had a big smile on their faces. Chumo bowed deeper in silence with all his heart, worshipping his father. He then got up and walked out of the palace with his mother. Once they were out of the royal palace's gate, he said to his mother, "I am sorry for bringing shame to you. I'll definitely return and bring back honor for you. My dear son, all I care about is your happiness. Don't worry about me. I am worried for you. I didn't allow you to learn martial arts and forbade you from showing off your intelligence so you won't have to be involved in the court's politics. But it seems that I was wrong," said his crying mother. Chumo understood all of that, but he didn't actually know whether to feel happy or depressed. On one side of his thoughts, this punishment was like a freedom from all of the rules in the royal palace, which made him feel confined. Not being able to see his two stepbrothers and the queen, who always found a way to make his life difficult one way or another, was also nice. On the other hand, he indeed felt filial piety toward his father, but what laid heavy on his heart was his mother. She may be a concubine of the king, but without him there, he somewhat feared what the queen and her two sons would do to his mother. He gave her a salute and a hug before heading out of the palace. This wasn't the first time he stepped outside alone, so he wasn't a bit worried because he had spent 7 days at the Magus Academy and had gained some insight in battling. He took one last look at the royal palace while holding the sword his father gave him. Back in the royal palace, Chumo's father was pacing left and right in his study, half doubting the decision he had made. Even though he wore the crown, the queen and the two princes' supporters were too influential to excuse Chumo against such solid evidence. He was about to get out of his study when the door slid open, and a woman wearing white dress came inside. "Shrine Priestess Yaomiel, what's wrong? Can it not wait for tomorrow? Forgive my rudeness, your majesty, but the reason for my arrival is urgent." "Speak." "I was praying in the shrine when I received a vision of a black three-legged bird flying away from the Dongbayu kingdom. Do you know what it means? Is it a blessing or a curse? Forgive me, your majesty, for I do not know the answer. What is certain, however, is that this is a sign of a big change in our kingdom." After the shrine priestess had left, the king fell into deep thought. The Dongbayu kingdom was actually under the control of the Han dynasty for several decades now, even though they had retained the rights to govern themselves. Could the big change be referring to them finally breaking away from their overlord? That was the only thing he could think, but after considering it, he thought it impossible. The Han dynasty was a powerful country that was the overlord of many other nations aside the Dongbayu kingdom. He gave it a few more thoughts but couldn't come up with a conclusion. Never it had occurred to him that the prince he had just banished would make waves in the future. Chapter 61, Rome. In the last 400 years, Rome had expanded from a city of just 3 square miles to a superpower of over 720,000 square miles, stretching from Africa to Asia Minor. Rome had become the most powerful state in the East Mediterranean, for they had conquered everything west of Greece and began to expand even further than that. All citizens of Rome were driven by the desire to make a mark in the history of their powerful Republic of Rome, to become the wealthiest, the most celebrated, and the most famous of all. Glory was the one thing all Romans wanted, and this wasn't an exception for one of the brightest sons of Rome, Julian Caesar. When Julian had been transported to Magus Academy, he was staying in the outskirts of Rome in a green field practicing his martial capability. A beam of light happened one evening while he had been asleep, and after he returned, he recognized he was in the same patch of grass where he had passed out. The first thing Julian wanted to know was to see his family again living in the walls of Rome. From his understanding, he had been gone for 7 days without anyone's knowledge, so he was sure people from his family had been looking for him. He ran back into Rome, a very magnificent city, inhabited by more than hundreds of thousands of citizens as well as slaves. He first passed by the Roman aqueduct, a marvel of human ingenuity, where fresh water was transported into the areas all over Rome. After that, he entered the gate of Rome guarded by several Roman soldiers, wearing a full set of legionnaire armor, traveling through lots of tall buildings and a wide road to accommodate the countless caravans, drawn by mostly slaves. He also passed by the crowded market where a lot of merchants were aggressively selling various goods from fruits to freshly acquired slaves. Since Julian was a descendant of a well-known family who had a strong enough influence in Roman politics, they had a sizable house where there were lots of slaves attending to their various needs. The number of slaves a person had usually showed how wealthy the head of the family was. Julian ran quite far without stopping. He didn't feel lethargic nor even feel the need to catch his breath. This was due to having him a stronger physique after his return from the Magus Academy. With this in mind, he ran faster at the thought of immediately bringing news to his mother, who should be at home, and tell her he would like to carry out his ambition to become the most influential person in Rome. When he neared his house, however, he stopped in place and went to a corner of a building. There were 2 armed soldiers in front of his devastated house, which was never a good sign. He wanted to come before the soldiers and demand what had happened. However, he kept his mind collected and ran to one of the 4 walls surrounding his place of residence that had a tall tree nearby. He climbed the tree and jumped over to get inside and inspect his place of residence. All he found, though, were turned over tables, smashed potteries, ripped curtains, and dusty floor. Apart from the mess, the inside appeared abandoned for a long time, as if no one had lived there. Julian went out using the path he had taken and headed toward his aunt's house, located not far from here. His uncle and aunt had more influence than his father, but as he also neared their place of residence, there were also 2 Roman troops guarding the gate of the house. Just when he was about to walk away, a familiar voice called out to him, "Julian." He looked toward the direction of the voice and saw a hooded figure. When the person lifted the hood, Julian exclaimed, "Celia." The girl ran to Julian and gave him a hug. "What's wrong? What happened here?" he asked his crying sister. "Father and mother, they were. Our family has fallen into rumbles," said another female hooded figure that appeared from a corner. She lifted her hood as well and was revealed to be Julian's aunt. "Tell me more, Auntie," Julian asked, his voice serious. "Let's go to a more secluded place," she replied. The 3 of them walked, and Julian was given a hood by his aunt. Once they were at a sufficient distance away from their former houses, his aunt broke the bad news that had happened during the 10 days he had been missing. Julian's father, who was a governor in the province of Asia Minor, had been accused of treason against Rome by their political rivals after presenting so-called evidence in the Senate. The Senate deemed it valid and proceeded to issue an order to execute the current head of the Kaiser family, as well as the alleged co-conspirators, which included Julian's uncle as well as several other figures who had a close tie to the Kaiser family. Most of those who were executed were the various influential figures, but they didn't include their offspring and wives, since according to the Senate, the sins of the father were not the sins of their sons and daughters. They also made an excuse that in accordance with the contributions that the others had procured in years of service, the sons, daughters, and wives of those who had sinned were only to be exiled. Hence, they were spared, but all of their assets were confiscated and driven out of Rome. Still, since Julian's aunt had her own connections, they still managed to stay in the city of Rome, but only hiding. She also told the story of how her husband had been dragged out of their houses, as well as other families whom House Kaiser had been friends with, in tears while they were brought before the town square and beheaded in public. When Julian heard that, he wanted to break everything he wanted to see but did all his best to contain it. He had to be strong for Celia right now, who was bawling her eyes out. Since Julian grew up with the best education of the Romans, not only in martial way, but also in science, he knew all of that gathered evidence had been a sham. He knew his father's political rivals were only after the amassed fortune his father and uncle had brought from trading with those in the Asia Minor, and they also feared the increasing political presence Julian's father and uncle were gathering. So these rivals decided it was the best time to strike before House Kaiser's influence got stronger. After all, in the politics of the Romans, the winner would get everything, whereas those opponents who lose would lose everything. Julian certainly didn't expect to be the head of the family after his return. Fortunately, even though all of their belongings had been confiscated, Julian recalled that his father had mentioned they had a secret savings with a merchant from the East who was currently staying in the city. It was supposed to be used for a trip to a distant relative who could look after them forever, but of course that was no longer possible. That was the first order of Julian's business, as he tried to think how he would go about his and his sister's future. After finding the merchant, Julian received a lump sum of money and found a place for his aunt and sister to stay in. A small, crowded, and shabby place, certainly much different from the clean and beautiful residence they had before all went downhill. In the end, Julian decided to stay in Rome. He then handed over all the remaining savings to his aunt. "Auntie, please take care of Celia for me." "What about you? What's your plan?" asked Julian's aunt. "I am joining the Legion," he declared. In Roman culture, there was no higher honor than fighting on the battlefield. Even the wealthiest merchant in the Republic of Rome wouldn't get far in politics if he had never had a record of success in warfare. Julian's goal in joining the Legion, apart from receiving a large amount of money and benefits once he retired, was that only through a career in the military would he be able to redeem his family's name and keep himself and remaining relatives safe. With the benefits he had received from the Magus Academy, he believed he would succeed in achieving the highest status in the Roman military. On that same day, Julian enrolled in one of the Roman legions. With his family status having been revoked, Julian had to start from the lowest rank in a legion. But it didn't worry him not one bit, since every lesson he would receive starting from the bottom would serve him once he was at the top. Chapter 62. The Thracians were a particularly fierce culture with their affinity in violence and conflict. They associated themselves with the god of war, Ares, from the Greek mythology, who was born in this world full of stories about strife. The god of war was said to have been born in Thrace, thus its citizens heavily worshipped the god, and due to this, many of the Balkan city-states hated them in revulsion for having such a barbaric god. The Greek and the Roman view the Thracians as mere bloodthirsty barbarians because of how undeveloped and uncivilized they lived. Most of the Thracians lived in settlements that were surrounded by wooden walls and wooden houses. The privileged citizens had stone-walled houses, but had haystacks as their roofs. Their leadership structure revolved in the physical prowess of a person, which decided who would be the chiefs in their dozens of tribes. After a month had passed since Thrax's return from Magus Academy, his life had turned upside down. Before, he had been considered a normal youth, slightly better than some from the Mede tribe, but nothing outstanding. However, when he showed off his newfound strength, none of his peers in the same age had been able to beat him. Even those who were a couple of years older than him and some adults had been beaten to a pulp. He was now the pride of the Mede tribe. In the first week of Thrax's return, he didn't waste time taking the initiation test to become one of the Thracians' warriors. Usually, this ritual was only allowed to be done by those who were 18 years of age because they involved dangerous activities, which could cost a person's life. Thrax insisted, and after being allowed by one of the village elders, Thrax attempted and finished the ritual, receiving the highest appreciation from the elders in both wilderness survival and weapon combat tests. In the following week, the Gedi, a northern tribe who were sworn enemies of the Tharcians, attempted a raid in one of their neighboring village tribes. Fortunately, Thrax was staying there, doing some spear training, and he almost single-handedly protected the whole village before reinforcements arrived, causing his popularity to rise even further. The 7 days' experience at Magus Academy not only made him physically stronger, but his skills with spear even exceeded some of those Thracian spearmen. In less than a month, his name began to be sung by the tribal members, calling him Thrax, the son of Ares. Right now, Thrax may still not be the strongest fighter within his tribe, however. His deeds had put him on a pedestal that some only dared to dream. This 15-year-old boy had the same martial prowess of a veteran Thracian warrior, and because of that, he had also been given the honor of being a part of the most influential Thracian warriors. With such titles, popularity, strength at such a young age, his prospective future caused many of the tribal chiefs to send their daughters to him, to rope him in whatever plans they may have. It wasn't only the many chiefs that had thrown their daughters at Thrax, since their culture valued martial prowess above all. A lot of women also threw themselves at Thrax. For Thracians males, it was normal to have dozens of women as concubines, since a good tree meant good seeds. But Thrax decided not to accept any of the marriage invitations, and ignored all of those beautiful, plump women for one particular woman, Sura, the most beautiful girl in his tribe whom he had liked since childhood, which the party was more than happy to accept. 2 months had passed since Thrax's return from the Magus Academy, and he lived like a chief. Preparations for his wedding were underway. He drank ale from morning until evening, feasted and trained in the honor of the god of war, Ares. His blissful life, however, had come to a halt when a cavalry wearing red armor coupled with thick metals on the chests entered the meaty tribe. Not a single one from the Thracians would fail to recognize where this cavalry came from. They were the Romans. As of the moment, the Romans and Thracians were enjoying a ceasefire to recoup their losses and focus their attention elsewhere. They had never been on friendly terms because the Romans had tried to subjugate not only them but including neighboring factions several times. The Thracians hated the Romans with all of their being because whenever they were invaded by the Romans, these Romans never occupied their lands except that they took a lot of the young, male and female, to become slaves in Roma, toiling for their pig masters. The arrival of the Romans was met with fierce riot from the citizens, and a lot of warriors from the meaty tribe returned from hunting and readied their weapons in hand. Fortunately, the Romans didn't draw their gladius, and the current village chief knew better. The village chief invited the Romans in front of his personal residence to have a public forum. With this, none of his citizens would dare attack the Romans, but still, a large number had gathered surrounding the Romans. "Get out, pigs, Roman scum, slave drivers!" shouted some of the meaty residents attempting to expel the Romans. "Hold your fucking towns, let the Roman have his say," an elder meaty exclaimed at the protesting residents before entering the tent. Several neighboring chiefs, as well as renowned warriors, including Thrax, attended the public forum and stood in the middle to have a discussion with the envoy from Roma. "Stay your business in an honest tongue, for we are honest people," said the meaty chief. The Roman cavalry stood stoic, not a bit fazed despite the unending hurls of insults from the citizens around them. If it weren't for one of the tribal elders, a battle would have definitely occurred. Thrax stood on the side as he listened to the Roman envoy, who was ready to convey his message. The envoy stepped forward and removed his helmet. He announced, "My name is Claudius Glaber. I'll keep this brief since we Romans and Thracians have deep grievances. I came here to tell you that we have decided to put such matters aside in order to unite for a just cause. You push your way into our lands and now you are asking for our help," an elder said, cutting off the Roman envoy. "Indeed, we have reason to believe that Mithridates and his army would be attacking from the east, encroaching from the Black Sea," replied the envoy. Another elder snapped, "But they are far removed from our village. How does it involve us?" The Roman envoy said calmly, "The Gedi has caught wind of this and started to take advantage of the upcoming chaos. We have received reports that barbarian hordes are starting to amass north, which is barely half a week's march from your village. The meaty chief's brows frowned. How many? Thousands, the Roman envoy replied. After saying that, the people started shouting again. Some were already picking up stones, throwing at the Romans' thick heavy metal armor. The Roman envoy was undaunted and shouted, "Align yourselves with Rome, pledge your service to the auxiliary, and join us in our campaign." The rioting became louder, and some people were already shouting, "Kill these pigs, and they are here to make us slaves." Thrax, who had been staying silent all this time, suddenly spoke. To what end? The people stopped rioting, wanting to hear what their prospective leader thought. Thrax exclaimed louder, "To what end?" The meaty citizens became speechless, waiting for the Roman envoy to answer. "Victory, of course. And how is that to be measured? What does your victory mean? The Geti have raided our villages, raped our women, and killed the young. Each time we push them back, we only see them return in greater numbers." The meaty chief, standing next to Thrax, said while nodding, "He is young and speaks out of turn, yet the truth falls from his mouth. It doesn't matter, for death to the Geti is what we want," said the Roman envoy. He shouted once more, and the people started cheering. "Death to the Geti." Thrax stepped forward and continued, "If we are to align with Rome, what will happen to our young women and elders left behind? They will be under Rome's protection. I promise," said the Roman envoy without flinching. Seeing how confident the Roman envoy answered, Thrax thought of Julian and unconsciously believed this person. With the increasing frequency of raids from Geti, he knew something had to be done so that his people could finally have some peace. It wasn't only him that had the same thought. Thrax's feelings were shared with all the other Thracian warriors. Indeed, they valued warring, but what good would that be if they went out and the people they cared for would be attacked, while they were away? If he had to be in the front line to take care of the problem, he would gladly do so as long he was sure that their homes would be protected. The rioting died down. "Very well," said the meaty chief. "We will align ourselves for the sake of our survival." On that same night, hundreds of Thracian warriors from several villages and tribes gathered to form a Roman escort. Before leaving, Thrax gave a bracelet to Sura fashioned from the bones of animals he had hunted, while Sura gave Thrax a shield she had the forge made. These two had already received the blessing to be married. However, the ritual had to be delayed due to the upcoming war. That didn't matter to Thrax, though, as he considered this girl already his wife. Thrax picked up his spear and Sura's shield, ready to go to war. Chapter 63. Alexandria, Egypt. Alexandria was to be regarded as the capital of knowledge and learning because of the great library. Its mighty stone pillars housed over tens of thousands of scrolls and parchments that held all kinds of knowledge as well as poetry. These were maintained by countless influential scholars and librarians, rewriting, re-inking, and keeping the place well maintained. The Great Library was also considered as the first research center, harboring all the wisdom of the ancient world. The creation of this great library had started 3 centuries ago, after the death of Alexander the Great, the king of the ancient city Macedonia. This famous conqueror had an unclear heritage due to the people of Macedon being considered as outsiders by the Greeks. Nevertheless, the great conqueror died without naming a successor of his massive empire stretching from Egypt to India. That resulted in civil wars all over the place, which resulted in dividing it into several smaller states. One of these states became the Kingdom of Egypt and ruled by the Ptolemaic dynasty. Due to the influence of Greeks valuing knowledge above all, what was once only a small museum turned into the greatest library of the world. Inside the great library, a beautiful black-haired girl sat in a private corner of the library wherein she had been studying non-stop for weeks. This girl, of course, wasn't a simple citizen, because not everyone could be given the privilege in getting a private space in this historic building. She was the 3rd daughter of the 12th Ptolemaic king, officially named Cleopatra VII, but more commonly called Clea. She was the 3rd daughter out of 6 siblings born from the royal family. Clea had always believed that in order to succeed in whatever task she may find herself into, The person who had the most knowledge always had the advantage. This was instilled to her since childhood, thus she had received the best education from philosophy, astronomy, rhetoric, and mathematics, amongst other things. However, ever since her return from the Magus Academy, Klee secluded herself learning a new subject in which she had the most interest in, magic. Although all lower worlds acolytes had been restricted in using magic, that didn't mean they were unable to practice cultivating the elements. As she took up a private space in the great library, which now became Klee's cultivation room for the past 2 months, she finally had a breakthrough of understanding in one of her 3 elemental affinities. Congratulations! You have mastered the middle stage foundation of water elements. Spirit energy water middle stage Klee, 15 years old spirit aptitude S. Spirit affinity, wind, water, lightning. Wind spirit middle stage. Water spirit middle stage. Lighting spirit initial stage battle power 12, 9. Spirit power 44, 39. Acolyte rank 4. Klee had managed to improve her understanding of 2 elements. She found the easiest the most. Due to that, her wind and water upgraded to the middle stage in just a short time. After achieving such a breakthrough, Klee stretched her sore limbs from sitting a long time as she exhaled, feeling wonderful and recharged. She then stepped out of the private room, which was only covered with a thin curtain, heading to the balcony located just beside this room. From the balcony, she rested her bronze-skinned arms and stared at the beautiful blue sky. Below was a road filled with merchant caravans and vendor stalls selling figs, grains, carpets, and various accessories, which the Egyptians loved to adorn themselves with. Looking straight into the horizon, the magnificent city of Alexandria was filled with many 2-story buildings and palm trees everywhere. If she observed even further, she could also see the vast, stretching Mediterranean Sea, and the dock that had a large flock of birds circling around the ships on shore. The scorching sun mixed with the cool sea breeze blew refreshingly on her face. Klee closed her eyes to marvel at the enlightenment of the water elemental she had just experienced when a bird landed on the balcony. She smiled because this bird became like a companion to her, visiting her every morning. Klee grabbed a piece of fig sitting on the balcony and fed the bird with it. After it had its full, the bird hopped on Klee's palm that had a symbol, which she then used her elemental wind to form a small gust to push the bird upwards. Restriction: usage of elemental wind energy detected. Power has now been decreased to 1/3 of its strength. The bird flew away with gleeful chirping, and as soon as it was out of sight, the accompanying woman who always took care of Klee's needs came in, and with her an old bald man wearing a long, white-yellowish robe also entered. Klee's brows twitched for a moment before it returned to her usual welcoming aura. She waited for the man to speak and salute. "Your Highness, Princess Klee, I have been tasked by your sister to ask you to join the gathering," said the old bald man. She replied while plucking a grape. "My honorable vizier, what is so important that my sister's personal regent came to me to be picked up?" The vizier lowered his head further and said, "All the neighboring states are here to meet the queen. The gathering would involve a discussion involving the future prosperity of our great nation, Egypt. Hence, your presence and great intellect is highly requested. Tell me, dear vizier, was it truly my sister's request or yourself?" she said, giving him a sharp glance. The vizier stayed silent, not even daring to look into Klee's eyes. "Haha, don't be so serious. Of course I'll attend. I would love to meet these people," said Klee, standing up from her seat. "Excellent, please come with me to the palace, princess." That day the pharaoh's palace welcomed many guests, all of whom were representatives from neighboring countries as well as tribes who frequently traded with Egypt. Some Greeks, some Afrikaans, some coming from the Far East, including traders from the west of Egypt. Almost everyone who had a trade agreement with Egypt came into attendance. They were talking to the person sitting on the throne, which was occupied by the acting ruler of Egypt, Baroness Roman IV, Klee's oldest sister, the queen in charge of Egypt. The main reason for this gathering was to find a solution to the trade conditions that had been so terribly disturbed by the political conditions in Egypt, which for the last decades had been filled with corruption and violence. Although the monarch technically owned all Egyptian lands as part of their estate, virtually all aspects of the Egyptian economy were nominally tightly controlled or supervised by the central government headquartered in Alexandria, spearheaded by a Raja. The previous Raja, as well as the current, exacted high tariffs on imported and exported goods, established price controls for various goods, imposed high exchange rates for foreign currencies, established state monopolies, and forced farming peasants to stay in their villages during the planting and harvesting periods. The systems implemented appeared good on paper, but the reality was that there were many obstacles they were facing. Thus, Egypt's condition continued to deteriorate, with its aristocrats losing influence, which could pose high risk of assassination to the princes and princesses due to growing power of the merchants. Bernice had ascended the throne as soon as her father left for Rome, due to being exiled after a revolt in Egypt. She tried hard to become a good leader, but almost all her court advisors had little confidence in her because she didn't have the talent in the kingdom's administration. Unlike her younger sister Clee, who was often invited to get involved in politics, Bernice didn't like Clee because every time Clee was in a gathering, she was always being overshadowed by Clee's intellect and popularity. Fortunately, Clee was smart enough not to get too deeply involved. Although sitting on a highly respected throne, Bernice appeared overwhelmed by the questions of those who were in attendance. She wasn't able to give them direct answers and was having a hard time dealing with various translators. Clee's arrival into the room immediately caught everyone's attention. She stood beside her sister on the throne and started helping Bernice with decisions and strategies. Clee easily communicated with the envoys coming from everything without needing a translator and answered all their questions and doubts. Although Bernice was there, Clee was still respectful and spoke only in turn, sometimes out, if she felt like Bernice was about to present an idea that was detrimental to the purpose of this gathering. Whenever she spoke, it was as if all men were charmed by her beautiful voice and allure, which tamed the rising tension as soon as things were starting to go south. In this gathering, most of the speakers were actually Egyptian, since the Ptolemaic dynasty spoke Greek and governed Egypt as Hellenistic Greek monarchs. Clee, on the other hand, was the only member of the royal family who could speak the native Egyptian language without the need for a translator. She was also fluent in Hebrew and Arabic since childhood, but this time Clee showed some miracle in the room by speaking in 10 languages. Hence, the people dearly loved her as they viewed her as a person in the royal family who had her heart set for the people of Egypt. Unbeknownst to them, Clee was indeed a smart woman, but her fluency in the various languages actually came with the help of the Magus symbol on her palm. The meeting ended with a new strategy for maintaining economic stability and security in Egypt. One of the main topics actually was the upcoming dry season, which was expected to come soon. But Clee didn't delve too much about it because the seasons were things out of her control. After bowing to her older sister, Bernice, Clee returned to her private room in the great library of Alexandria and started training once more. Chapter 64, Britannia. Time ever passed as its nature. Emery decided to stay in the settlement called Mischire for the meantime. He postponed his thoughts of finding out more about the Marauders' chief, prodigy, who was the mastermind behind the attack. For now, he spent time helping Granny maintaining the herb garden and learning how to make various potions. Granny observed the young Emery and grew increasingly fond of him since his ability in caring for the plants and natural talent in potion making was a cut above Lanzo. Due to her growing trust in Emery, she gave more and more tasks to him, and in return, Emery's understanding of the plant element and concocting potions resulted in him gaining knowledge more than he had ever expected. Fortunately, Lanzo didn't seem to mind it one bit and continued on his own business in gathering plants and helping Granny with various tasks. In his first month of staying in the Mischire settlement, Emery had started to know more about the plant element and eventually mastered the initial stages of plant spirit. With that came a sense of connection with the plants. He could feel the flow of spirit in each plant that had some unique energy in them. With that in mind, he had started experimenting with the moisture, sun, fertilizer, etc. In time, Emery's methods had improved the quality of these herbs. Not only Granny's medicinal plants, but when he also started mentioning to Granny and Lanzo these methods, they shared it with some of the Mitcher residents' vegetable and fruit fields, which proved to be most effective. 2 more months passed. The air was getting chilly, and some of the trees were starting to die from the coldness. Emery was starting to see his breath in each exhalation. He was wearing thick fur, made from various animal skins, the same as the other residents to combat the increasing coldness. He wasn't worried about the upcoming winter, though, since the most recent improvements with the vegetable and fruit fields resulted in a large harvest. This morning, Emery was actually more excited at the thought of how he had just penetrated the barrier of his cultivation. That was now the middle stage for the plant element. Congratulations! You have mastered the middle stage foundation of plant elements. Spirit energy plant middle stage Emery, Ambrose, 16 years old. Spirit aptitude B. Spirit affinity, plant water, earth, darkness. Plant spirit middle stage. Water spirit initial stage. Earth spirit initial stage. Darkness spirit inestimable battle power 16. 11. Spirit power 32. 21. Acolyte rank 2. Because he had been working with plants that involved tilling the soil and watering them every morning and evening, he also successfully mastered the basic spirit understanding for both the water and earth elements. As for darkness, though, Emery had no clue how to begin cultivating it. He had once tried staying in a nearby cave, which was fortunately uninhabited, but it was for naught. Its darkness didn't help one bit, so he couldn't help feeling a bit behind the rest of the other acolytes, including his friends, located in different parts of this world. In the Magus Academy, even though he had no idea how they were doing, he half blamed it due to his low aptitude, but whatever the cause was, Emery placed it at the back of his mind and determinedly focused on what was improving at the moment instead. Although a total of 3 months had passed, Emery still decided not to pursue the marauders. He could still remember as if it was yesterday how he had almost died again fighting against the 2 adult marauders. Of course, those men would be just the lackeys, the lowest of the bunch. If so, then how much stronger would the chief be? It would be too difficult for him to fight with them at this time, but as long as he was alive, revenge would never be too old. Earlier, before sunrise, Emery had attempted to use the spells he had bought in the Magus Guild inside the cave. Unfortunately, however, even after mastering the initial stages of the water and earth, he still hadn't been able to use the 2 spells he had. Another reason not to pick a fight with the marauder group for now. So finally, Emery continued focusing on cultivating the elements, especially the plant element. Emery proceeded to head to the herb garden, wanting to try out his rare spell that was of the plant affinity. After making sure he was alone and no one hiding by the trees, he plucked out one bunch of round black fruits that was called elderberry. Fragmentation. Slowly, the medicinal fruit withered and secreted a dark liquid which was floating in the air. Emery hurriedly grabbed a clay pot lying nearby and pointed his finger to the clay pot where the dark liquid dripped into before looking around the area again, making sure no one had seen him. At the same time, his palm glowed and issued various notifications in his mind. One essence found elderberry essence. A good deal of knowledge about how the essence could be used entered his mind, and Emery started to feel more close to these plants. Aside from feeling joyful that the spell was working, Emery smiled at the plants, which he could somewhat feel were giving a vibrant good aura. Since it was in his nature to experiment as well, he began plucking the other plants that weren't in the database, and with each usage of the fragmentation, it felt like the plants were being used in accordance to their purpose. He then picked up a mushroom that had a red cap with yellow spots. Emery remembered that this plant was actually poisonous, but Granny told him that in order to counteract the poison inside the people who had accidentally eaten stuff like these, they have to know the properties and what would work against them. Unidentified medicinal plant, unknown properties, fragmentation. It withered the same as the elderberry, but this time, 2 different colored essences came out of the mushroom. 2 essences found. Instantly, a list of the mushroom's functions and specific properties entered Emery's mind. He was over the moon when another notification came into his mind. Unidentified herb rank 1 data received. You are awarded 10 contribution points. When he had first found this, what he only received was only 1 point, but now that he used fragmentation to learn more about the mushroom, he received 10 times the amount for the same plant. Granted that even knowing the properties of a plant, it didn't mean he had the understanding how to apply or use this knowledge properly. So, he still had to test it out on how to use these essences. With the help of the science of fragmentation, however, that would eliminate unnecessary trials and errors. Emery hurriedly picked up the other plants he had previously discovered as unidentified first and foremost, and continuously used fragmentation on them. Unidentified herb rank 1 data received. You are awarded 10 contribution points. You are awarded 10 contribution points. Total contribution points. Total contribution points, 140. Dusk was arriving, but he finally finished using fragmentation on all the plants in the garden as well as in the forest. His next course of action was to check out the dried herbs stored inside the storage room Granny had lying around. He wasn't sure if the dried one would have some additional essence or something, but based on how Granny kept some of them dried while others were fresh, there should be some difference in the essences. Emery made sure that only one of each would be used for the fragmentation, since these plants were not cultivated inside the medicinal garden. He particularly focused on the ones that had become powder or extremely dried up. Unidentified herb rank 1 data receive incomplete. You are awarded with 3 contribution points. Even though he only got unsubstantiated points, Emery was not disappointed. He was sure that there were hundreds or even thousands of plants in this world that could give him more points. Emery tried fragmentation on dozens of other plants in the storage room, which gave him additional contribution points. As he looked for more herbs that he hadn't used fragmentation yet, he then remembered the ingredients in the special storage basket. The use of this ingredient was extremely limited, but the temptation was too strong for Emery not to use fragmentation on it, even though he and Lanzo had been reminded several times in handling this valuable ingredient. He lifted open the basket's lid and carefully placed down the boxes on the floor. There were a few ingredients in the boxes, but one in particular ingredient caught Emery's eyes the most. It was the bluish powder that Granny sometimes used to calm down a person's high body temperature. Emery pinched a bit of the powder, and when he used fragmentation, the information he received surprised him before the blue powder turned into brownish dust. Unidentified herb rank 2 data received incomplete. You are awarded with 30 contribution points. 30 contribution points, and the first rank 2 herb Emery had ever seen, and it was 10 times more valuable from the other dried herbs, and at least 3 times more than the fresh herbs he had picked. As information about how this rank 2 herb flooded his field of view, Emery's mind went into a fast track on how he could make use and combine it with the other herbs lying around. Feeling more excited than ever, he started experimenting with it, but still made use of it sparingly. Chapter 65. More peaceful days passed, and everyone in the settlement was now wearing thick fur clothing to keep themselves warm against the cold breeze. A roaring fire was being fed dried firewood by Emery inside Granny's hut stone furnace, which stretched into the roof to blow out the smoke. In his day-to-day life, Emery spent most of the hours he had in learning how to make his own concoctions with Granny's help. She had given him various recipes which he followed with and was successful in brewing effective potions. This time, though, he felt like with the help of the spell, fragmentation and spell from the path of apothecary, he was confident he could make his own recipe. The universal flora knowledge helped him understand the classification of plants, their properties, and their effects, whether good or bad. With this information, Emery mixed and matched the properties of each herb to either create a more powerful concoction of Granny's recipes or create a whole new potion that had an entirely different effect despite being made from the same ingredients. He learned various methods of drying, brewing, grinding, amongst other things in order to bring out the properties Emery wanted to achieve in concocting the potions he needed. Some of these methods were listed in the parchments his mother had about alchemy, which the late scholar from his now burned estate had helped him with. But some methods were entirely new ways from Granny's own personal experience. Although Emery could be considered a fledgling in this field, his dexterous hands and experimentative nature caused him to learn more with each day that passed. After every successful potion he had concocted, Emery used the analyze spell from the apothecary to find out the effect of the potion without needing to test for the experimental results. It was a whim when used the spell fragmentation afterwards, but it turned out to be a good idea since he found out that he could retrieve the essences of a potion, which he started using more frequently, to use the same ingredients again in a different manner. Although the spell didn't extract all the ingredients' essences used and became less each time, it still helped him to not immediately run out of ingredients to experiment with. It went without saying that Emery only used this skill whenever Granny or Lanzo was not around. Else how would he be able to explain such supernatural occurrences? Every once in a while, Emery sometimes presented to Granny the potions he had made, and she was extremely impressed on how her new student had a natural talent in alchemy. She herself could understand the combination Emery used because she knew the ingredients by heart, but she was still surprised by the new ideas Emery brought to her. Another month had passed, and little snowflakes were falling from the sky above. Emery sat by the fire, eating freshly baked bread, while looking proud of himself at the medicinal items on the alchemy table he had made over the course of his apprenticeship under Granny. He used the analyze spell first on the first item that had green paste-like content. Healing paste. This is a paste that can be applied to external wounds. Once used, the open wound would be disinfected, and the body's natural healing capability would close and dry the wound twice as fast. The difference between this healing paste compared to Granny's was that Emery's dried the wounds twice as fast, unlike the one from Granny. He then used the analyze spell on another container that also had green liquid inside, stamina potion, a potion full of various nutrients that the body needs. It is used to re-energize lost energy of a person's body within a few moments. Be warned, it is bitter. Emery made several of these medicinal items, since the ingredients were quite easy to find and able to cultivate easily. These two items were things that he and Granny believed to be at their most optimal stages. They heavily focused on these because the general usage would be most helpful in their day-to-day lives, especially in the winter where most of the food would come from hunting, even if they had a plentiful amount of food in the storage. The next two medicinal items had red and blue in its contents. They were actually still in the process of being experimented further, but they were at least useful in their own ways. The first was actually a paste, like the healing, but it had quite a different property. Strength paste. Once applied to the parts of a human body, it could stimulate the muscles in the part it was applied to, increasing muscle strength twice of its normal capability. Be advised, the increase is temporary and cannot be used repeatedly because it would damage the muscles. Cleansing potion. Drinks that can remove harmful bacteria and toxins in the body. Emery had no idea what the term bacteria was, but based on what he had read so far about the properties of each ingredient, it seemed to be something minuscule that couldn't be seen with the naked eyes, which were harmful to the body. Both of these medicinal items required a lot of blue powder, which they had a limited amount of. Emery wanted to try out a couple more things he had in mind, but with Granny beginning to be more strict with the blue powder's usage, he had to keep to himself and respect her wishes. In the afternoon, Emery took the time to show how these medicinal items were made to Granny and Lanzo. Seeing the new techniques Emery had done, Granny grew increasingly interested in Emery's method. She somehow had an inkling of them, so she still mentioned some side effects of this blue powder. Interesting. Where did you get the idea from? Asked Granny, taking a look at the freshly grounded ingredients. Just a lucky guess, Granny, answered Emery, blushing a bit. I believe that alchemy is a method of finding order within its chaos, but it's like each of these techniques and functions you keep on mentioning are proven and tested methods. You really are talented and loved by nature, said Granny with a warm smile. Emery laughed. If he could only share his abilities, maybe it would be more beneficial to everyone in the world. But for now, he was satisfied that he could share at least the knowledge on how to produce these medicinal items. May I ask where I can find more of this ingredient? Emery said, pointing to whatever remained of the blue powder. It's better for you not to know where it came fr, answered Granny, but a sudden fit of coughing stopped her from speaking. Lanzo came immediately and rubbed her back. Emery went to get a warm drink and said, "Your coughing seems to get worse. Is there anything I can do to help?" Granny issued a weak smile after drinking. She said, "Ha ha, you're a good boy, Emery, but there's nothing you can do to help me. It's always like this in the winter, Emery." Sadly, her condition doesn't seem to get any better, said Lanzo, still rubbing her back. Emery observed Granny from head to toe. He couldn't help but notice how she seemed to be getting thinner every day. He placed another firewood in the stone furnace, hoping the rising temperature inside the hut would at least ease her coughing. She then went inside her corner of the hut, probably wanting to rest. Once Granny had left, Lanzo approached Emery and said, "Good stuff you're making here, Emery." "Thanks, Lanzo," answered Emery, stirring the cauldron to make more of the stuff that seemed to at least ease Granny's fit of coughs. "By the way, can you keep this between us? I actually know where the ingredients come from. Granny told me about it a long time ago," whispered Lanzo, closing the lid of the blue powder. Emery's interest was piqued. "Sure, I'll keep quiet about it, actually." Lanzo then told the reason why Granny was reluctant to tell about the origin of the ingredient. The blue powder was taken from a place she had called the Forbidden Forest. It was a dense forest, located west of Mitchell, about a day's walk. This forest was filled with huge trees stretching for an unknown distance, which resulted in some tales telling that those who had gotten lost became evil spirits wailing for eternity because the sun's light could never penetrate its soil. Hence, it was also called the Evernight Forest. You better not think about going there, you hear me? They say all those who enter never return and become food for the dangerous monster lurking inside. "What kind of monster?" asked Emery, not flinching an eye. He wouldn't say he was immune to being scared, but after what he had seen in the Magus Academy's world, monsters were not a new thing for him. "Are you crazy? What kind of question is that? All those who have seen it never survive the encounter," exclaimed Lanzo with eyes widened in disbelief. With a blank face, Emery answered, "Lanzo, if no one survives, then where did the story come from?" Lanzo had no answer as he stared with bewildered eyes at Emery. He coughed and said, "Anyway, you should come with me to the town tomorrow. The folks there need help delivering this season's tribute to the king." The city in question was of course the Lioness Kingdom's main city, where the Lioness's royal palace stood. Chapter 66. On the morning of the winter's first light's arrival, the residents of Mistshire were gathering in the middle of their settlement, where there was a large roaring fire that stretched a couple of feet in the sky. Not far away were many carts, which were filled with various produce of this year's bountiful harvest. It had potatoes, cabbage, carrots, furs, grains, cheese, some games, amongst other things. The carts also had some handicrafts made by the people of Mistshire, such as clothes, woven furs, and footwear. Selling their year's labor of crops and crafts in the city of the Lioness was one of the settlement's yearly routine the moment winter arrived, so they could survive or at least ease the harsh, cold environment. By the head of the cart was Jacob, the village elder, who was also their main bridge between the Mitchell settlement and the city of the Lioness Kingdom. On this trip, Jacob will be accompanied by Emery and Lanzo. There weren't many youngsters in the village. Either they were too old or too young. Both young men, although young, they are currently the most healthy and energetic among the villages. Jacob didn't ask the adults because, of course, they'd be busy hunting in the wild. Again, even though they still had an ample amount of stored food. After all, having too much food in the winter was never a bad course of action. Emery initially thought about refusing the elder's request because his latest experience in the Lioness Kingdom capital, Lionarch, still left a pang of pain in his heart. That was his first reason, but it was more of a worry that someone would recognize him in that city. Still, after a couple of months though since he had disappeared again, maybe, just maybe they had forgotten or no one else was looking for him. He made sure to grab a heavy cloak as well as something to cover the lower part of his face. In the end, he decided to come for two reasons. The first was to seek information about the current state of the Lioness Kingdom as well as if anyone would know about Prodigy, the Marauders' chief, who attacked his estate. Second was his deep interest in learning more plants. In finding more materials in one spot, there was no other place better than the city where most of the produce, or even the most scarce items, could be found. He also wished that he could sell his new potions in town for a decent profit. As for other reasons that still bothered him, Emery didn't want to think about it at all. Emery came back with Lanzo, carrying some items to place in the cart. "Wow, this year's cart is the most it has ever been," exclaimed the elder Jacob, inspecting each cart. The woman who had just placed down her grown potatoes commented while smiling at Emery. "Of course, it's all because of that handsome young boy right there. Oh my, look at him, he seems to be freezing. Make sure to bring him back as soon as possible, Jacob." As Emery and Lanzo helped the others load their produce in the carts, the residents they helped also smiled broadly at Emery. Even though Emery hadn't interacted much with these people, they knew the methods came from him, so he had become a small blessing for them. "Yo, old Jacob, we trust your trading skills are not outdated like your age, huh? Come back with much profit," said one of the farmers. "Haha, these old bones ain't gonna affect my tongue," answered Jacob. "Have a safe trips." Overall, there were about 2 carts full. The carts were pulled by the only 2 village horses. All 3 together, Jacob, Emery, and Lanzo set off together to head to the capital of Lioness Kingdom, Lionarch. Old man Jacob mentioned to the 2 that the trip would take almost a full day, so they would have to find a place to stay in the city once the sun sets. On the road, Lanzo decided to pass the time in telling his story to Emery. Lanzo was also a son of the lowest-ranking nobility from a different kingdom. One day, an illness struck the peasants of their fief, which in turn spread into their own estate. Eventually, one by one, people started dying, until Lanzo finally decided to call someone for help despite himself being sick. So, he headed out to the city nearby them, but since he was too sick, he somehow found himself in the woods. On his last breath, their granny was looking at him with teary eyes. She then took him, fed him, and gave some sort of potion which healed him. He then told Granny about his estate. However, when he returned, the whole place had become a ghost town. No one was alive, except for him. After that, he decided to follow Granny on the road, traveling from one place to another. A year had passed, and Lanzo had thought about going back to his home. However, he didn't have anything back there anymore other than empty buildings and arid farms. With no one to return to, he had no reason to go back. Although Emery had known Lanzo for quite some time now, this was the first time he had heard Lanzo's story despite them staying in the same hut. He had indeed felt some connection with Lanzo, and this probably was the reason. They suffered almost an identical fate. Feeling a bit closer to Lanzo now, Emery also told his story, but of course not mentioning the crouton and adjusting some parts. He told the tale of how the marauders raided his home and narrowly escaped with his life on horseback, making it match on how he had been found in the woods by one of the residents of the Mischire settlement. As he shared his story, Emery remembered everything as if it was just last night. He was past the time of grief though, but he was surprised to see Lanzo's tears running down his cheeks. "I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry to hear that," said Lanzo, wiping his tears which was about to turn into ice. Emery half smiled, thinking how Lanzo had a kind heart. Even though he's having a hard time as much as him, Lanzo can still care about someone else's problem. "There's nothing much that I can do since it was the God's will that had struck my home. But as for you, wait until I get stronger. "I will definitely help you, brother," said Lanzo, sticking his fist out. Emery gave a laugh, bumping fist with Lanzo, and said, "And when is that?" 5 years, no 10, 20 years at the very least," declared Lanzo, standing up. Emery burst into laughter, hearing that his revenge would come in 20 years. Those marauders would have already been killed or bony old men by that time. Nevertheless, Lanzo's words cheered him up. They talked more for a good half an hour about various topics. What was really on Emery's mind, though, was the Forbidden Forest, where it was actually located, and any other stories Lanzo might have had heard. In all honesty, Emery believed he had spent too much time in Mistshire. There still wasn't a day that went by when he hadn't been worried that a man who knew him would eventually show up in Granny's hut. If that happened, then most likely everyone would be killed, just like his previous home. After they had sold these items and spring arrived, he decided he would travel alone and train on the road. He wasn't worried much about the things he would be encountering, such as beasts or possibly bandits, as long as they were few, since his knowledge of plants and herbs, alchemy, and swordsmanship should be enough to keep him alive. That should be easier as well, since Emery didn't know when he would be transported back to the Magus Academy. For now, his general destination would be the Forbidden Forest to gather more of that blue powder, as well other possible rare herbs there. Once he felt like he had prepared enough, he then would seek out the marauders' chief, Prodigy, and the mastermind for revenge. Just as the sun was about to set, Emery, Lanzo, and Jacob arrived at the Lionarch. Chapter 67. Lionarch, the capital city of the Lioness Kingdom. Lionarch, aside from being the royal household being located here, this coastal city was also the trading center of the Britannia Island, due to being close to other factions south. Due to its prime location, the city had a fairly dense population, with lots of different goods traded in and out of Britannia. Located on top of a hill, Emery could see the majestic stone royal palace, which housed the royal family and safeguarded its city from any foreign invaders outside of Britannia as well as inland. The Lioness had also established this place as their main base of military operations. Hence, the security of the merchants, including the roads leading to this city, was well guarded with soldiers. As the 3 travelers from Mistshire settlement passed the large gate that could fit 2 carts on both sides, they were welcomed by the hundreds of houses and dozens of shops along the main road heading toward the city center plaza, where the marketplace was located. Emery couldn't help but notice that the place seemed more crowded from the last time he had gone here. It was actually due to the arrival of the winter season, because some settlements nearby still hadn't been fully developed, thus not having the appropriate clothing or tools to survive the upcoming harsh nights. He adjusted his face coverings and cloak to make sure no one would be able to recognize him. Although he knew his face wasn't that much known to the public, the nasty, noble boys he had used to play with might probably be here, especially that Abe Fantumer, since his father was the right hand of the king. Jacob led the way, but instead of going straight to the marketplace, he turned the cart to the side and got in line along with other carts from other settlements, where there was a 2-story warehouse guarded by many royal soldiers. The other people's carts couldn't compare on how full theirs were. "Okay, we're next. Come on, boys, help me get these carts up," said Jacob, pulling the cart in front of the steward, who had a ledger sitting on a table. Lanzo helped Jacob, while Emery still pulled his own cart by himself. After parking it before the steward asked, "Location?" "Mistshire, honorable steward," replied Jacob. "Mistshire? Where is Mistshire?" "Ah, here it is, so what do you have?" said the steward, writing some stuff with his quill and ink. Jacob bowed and said, "Of course, honorable steward. This season's harvests are." The steward then started listing the items one by one, as Jacob gave how much they weigh. Good, you have brought so much more than you used to." "Excellent work," said the steward, as if it was rehearsed. "Yes, honorable steward. I hope you are pleased," said Jabok, bowing multiple times. "However, the marketplace is flooded with too many fur clothings. Their value right now is little. For the fruits and vegetables, though, let me see how much they are worth after my men double check their weight," said the steward. Then 2 hulking men grabbed the cart's content and started placing each against a scale that had stones on the other side. Please, these fur clothings are the best out of the other settlements. Our produce as well is the freshest and the tastiest. You wouldn't find one as good in the market, said Jacob before quickly, winking at Emery. Dear kind and honorable steward, we would appreciate it most for the wonderful price you would give us. Yeah, said the steward. His men then came over and finished the weighing. They whispered something as he continued listing the weights. He pulled out a bag of coins underneath his desk and started counting. After he finished counting, he separated about a third of the coins and said, "Okay, 300 coins for the whole lot. 100 coins are to be given to the royal coffers as your settlement's tribute. 100, that's more than half of what we paid tribute last year for less produce," exclaimed Jacob. The steward sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. "This is required by the king's right hand, Lord Phantomer. If you have any issues, bring it to him. We are only doing what we are ordered. I thank you for your generosity, honorable steward." It was Jacob's turn to sigh. His shoulders slumped as he bowed weakly before grabbing the bag of coins and leaving a smaller bag from his waist. Jacob then tied the larger bag on him with a thick rope and returned to Emery and Lanzo. "What happened, Elder Jacob?" asked Emery, glancing at the steward who had a smirk while riding. "That greedy bastard gave us only about 300 coins. Everything we had in the cart should have been at least 500 coins. But he gave some bullshit reason about taxes ordered by a lord named Phantomer. I'm hoping that Odin would burn him to ashes," answered Jacob, feeling the coins on his waist. "Then what was the other bag you gave?" Emery followed up with another question. "Must you really ask? If we didn't give him that, who knows how much he will give us next season?" The two youngsters pulled the carts while Jacob once again led the way. Emery looked at the sides and realized there were a lot of merchant stalls selling direct to the public down the street. He could hear some customers haggling fiercely with the merchants because of absurd prices. But merchants said something along the lines of new taxes, etc. Despite the prices being high, the street they passed by was still crowded with buyers. "Elder, have you not considered opening a stall in the city?" asked Emery. "We can't afford such things. In order to open a stall here, we will have to pay an even higher tribute with more taxes. A small settlement like ours couldn't afford to even rent one, much less buying a space here," explained Jacob. "Then what about selling outside the walls? The city forbids anyone selling without a permit and outside the city walls. They would seize all a person's belongings and be thrown into the dungeon if you get caught. We can't even directly sell to the merchants in the marketplace because that's also against the kingdom's law. So we're left with only selling it at the kingdom's warehouse." Jacob continued grumbling as they walked inside the city, looking for a place to stay after parking their carts near a stable. He shared to Emery and Lanzo how he was becoming more and more disappointed at the Lioness Kingdom, which he believed had become corrupt by raising such high taxes. "Damn, I need something to quench my dried throat. Let's go to the inn. We will rest there for the night and return to Miss Shire at first light. Here, take these since both of you are part of Miss Shire, and help me deliver the merchandise." Jacob gave Emery and Lanzo 5 coins each. He then walked away, still grumbling to himself. Emery stared at the 5 coins and was about to say something when Lanzo touched Emery's shoulders before shaking his head. Lanzo said, "Leave him be. It's always like this every season. Old Jacob just needs his drink, and after that, he will be better again." Emery gripped the coins in his hand tighter. He actually wasn't thinking about the coins he and Lanzo received, rather, what would be left after Jacob spends the coins. The coins belonged to all of the citizens in Miss Shire. Anyway, like Lanzo had mentioned, Emery let it go and started to walk with Lanzo on the streets of Lionark. As they strolled around looking for the shops he wanted to go to, Emery reflected about the coins he had just received. He was the son of Geoffrey Ambrose, a person who had once belonged in the noble ranks, albeit being the lowest ranking. Back then, Emery generally walked with dozens of coins in his pocket, but it seemed like he truly was fortunate, because before he didn't have to do anything and the Peasants would give them their seasonal tribute to their family's steward. He hadn't considered how much labor a person had done for a whole season, just to receive something he had thought as measly coins before. This got him into thinking more about it when Lanzo suddenly invaded his thoughts. "Hey, what are you thinking about? Don't be gloomy, anything in particular you want to visit?" said Lanzo. Chapter 68. Emery shook his head before giving Lanzo a mysterious smile. Leading the way, Emery took Lanzo to the city center, the marketplace. There were two things in particular that he needed right now. The first item was a weapon. Emery needed a good weapon, more specifically a sword, so he could practice as well as defend himself in case of emergency situations. He had asked about the sword he had taken from the marauders, but it looked like it got dropped somewhere along the road while he was losing consciousness and falling from the horse. Emery had asked around in the settlement, however, there was no one there that used a sword. They deemed it too impractical because small knives could do the same job, and forging axes was way easier. Bow and arrows were also popular in Mistshire for hunting some game. It had been a while since Emery had held a sword. He planned to train with Lanzo, since Lanzo also used to be a nobleman and confirmed knew some sword techniques. So, he was hoping he could get a good deal with the coins he had for 2 swords and shields. The clanking noise of the hammer and anvil got louder as the two of them approached the blacksmith. A rugged, tan-hairy man worked on the outside furnace located outside, covered by a wooden roof, while its main store was inside the door beside. The heat from the forge gave some sense of comfort to the frigid weather covering the whole of Britannia. On the side were displayed various farm tools, as well as swords, axes, shields, spears, maces, etc., as well as some huge chunks of iron and firewood lying near the furnace. But when they asked if they could take a look, but the smithy replied these weren't for sale before directing them to the door, so Emery and Lanzo stepped into the smithy's door to talk to the shop owner. The inside had a much greater collection of weapons. There were armors also on the display too, but they were far and few in between the racks. "Welcome to Eric's Weapons and Armors. Feel free to take a look and buy whatever fits your needs," said the shop owner. Both of the youngsters nodded and proceeded to take a closer look at the weapons rack, which had a lot of swords on display. Emery could tell by just observing that all these weapons here were made from iron, the most common metal which any equipment and tools were made from. He was disappointed a bit, but understood that higher quality swords such as the ones wielded by the noble lords couldn't be bought in a smithy like this, instead obtained from outside the island. Emery grabbed one and tested its balance and feel as he gave it a few swings. It felt too heavy for him, which meant his sword arm would get fired at a faster rate. He grabbed another sword that was thinner and longer, but this time it was too light and couldn't feel any weight behind it. That meant he would lose in a clash against another person wielding a heavier sword. Finally, the third one had a thicker arm guard, slightly thicker spine, but slightly shorter length. Emery gave it one swing, and he could tell that the balance between the tip of the sword as well as his hand was just right. "This is a good sword. How much for this?" asked Emery, placing it in front of the shop owner. "Excellent choice. That sword is our best seller for most nobles. It costs 30 coins. "Pardon me, did I hear you say 5 coins? Asked Emery, trying to haggle already. The shop owner laughed. 30 coins, young lad, no less. But 5 coins is all I have. Anything you can do for me with a similar quality, good shopkeeper?" Emery said, a bit disappointed. "There's none here, young lad. We have some lower quality swords, but they are all at least 10 coins. As for anything less than that, we have some under the 5 coins. They are the ones stored. They're in the corner," said the shop owner, pointing to the weathered rack that had several swords, some of which appeared visibly bent or had some chippings. Emery certainly hadn't expected that even the lowest quality would already cost 5 coins. He then kept switching glances between the coins in his hand and the weathered rack, trying to debate with himself if it was even worth it. "Hey," Lanzo called out to Emery. "If you really need it, I can give you my 5 so you can at least buy a decent sword. You know, chipped and bent swords are as good as nothing." "It's fine, Lanzo. I just remembered I have another way to get the coins." Emery showed the contents of his bag to Lanzo before pulling it out one green paste and laying it on the table. He then looked at the shop owner and said, "Can we lower the price with this?" The shop owner laughed again. "This thing you put out ain't in my expertise. Better you go to the apothecary at the other just 3 blocks from here." Emery and Lanzo gave a nod before heading out of the smithy and looked for the apothecary. To make sure they wouldn't be looking in the wrong place, both of them asked the locals, and it wasn't long before they finally found the shop. Lionarch Apothecary, said the hanging huge sign, written in a cursive slanted text. It was the largest shop Emery and Lanzo had seen so far in the city, and judging by the few guards standing outside in leather armor, it probably was also the most popular shop in the city. The 2 young lads went inside and were immediately welcomed by the strong scent of medicinal herbs being brewed by the fat old man, who was stirring a big round cauldron just behind the counter. The shop had a large interior filled with different herbs and plants on the side, potions and paste sitting on a shelf, and some insects lying around in different sections of the shop. Although it was a large shop, the place only had these 2 young lads as customers. The fat old man seemed intent on focusing on his work, so when Emery called out to him, he replied, "What do you kids want?" Lanzo frowned, but Emery didn't mind it one bit. Somehow, Emery, this fat old man, resembled Eon back in the Magus Academy, well, at least in this manner. Emery didn't waste time and placed 3 stamina potions as well as 2 healing pastes on the counter. He said, "We are wondering, how much would these be if we sold them to you?" The old man balanced his wooden ladle on top of the cauldron and proceeded to pop open the lid of the stamina potion and smell it. He also did the same with the other container holding the healing paste and tasted both a little. Looks like we have a tonic for energizing the body and a paste for healing external wounds," replied the old man, whose neck was barely visible. Just by smelling and tasting it, he actually found out their functions immediately, and this made Emery happy since he understood he was talking to an expert. "So how much can we sell this?" Emery asked. The man snorted before shrugging. He said, "For the whole lot, 5 coins. "What, these should be worth more than that," Lanzo exclaimed. "Look kids, if you aren't interested, just go away," snapped the old man. Emery patted Lanzo on the shoulder before saying, "Pardon, but can you tell me why is it low?" The old man eyed Emery and stared directly in the eyes. "Okay kid, since you asked nicely," he then pointed to the shelf behind him. "See those things? They contain the same stuff. They are helpful, sure, but they are the easiest to make. I have made too many, so yours ain't nothing special." Lanzo then asked, "How much do you sell those for?" 20 coins each, boy," the man answered without hesitation. Lanzo seemed to make another snide comment again, but Emery reached Lanzo's shoulders again before he had said anything. "I understand, you said first, so what's the second reason?" Emery pointed out. "Second thing is I don't know who made these. The ingredients for these potions might be the same, but not all are made equal. Some may use a different concocting technique, slightly different measurements, subpar ingredients, among other things, which could create a whole lot of varying degrees of result. So tell me who made these." "I did," said Emery, not flinching. "Humph, a young boy who thinks he knows alchemy. I'm already doing you a favor, and for 1 coin each on an otherwise probably worthless item. It's a good deal already, even if your parents made it. I don't believe these items would be as powerful as mine, because this art needs dozens of years to master. Give me 1 moment." Emery then took out all the stamina potion and healing paste he had brought with him, leaving only 1 of each. In total, 5 stamina potions and 5 healing pastes were laid down on the counter. The old man stared at Emery before saying, "Like I said, 10 coins for each one of them." Chapter 69. The old fat man tapped the table's counter repeatedly as he waited for Emery to make a decision. Emery had thought about this. If he would sell these for a total 10 coins profit, then he would have enough to at least buy probably a decent sword and a shield or something else. Just as when he was about to say yes, it was Lanzo's turn to cut him off. "Hey, are you sure about this? Why don't we check out other places? We both know this healing paste and stamina potion should be worth at least 3 times "I got this, Lanzo," said Emery when the alchemy expert snorted. The owner said, "Kids, my shop is the best there is in this city and in our kingdom. Even the royal physician often comes here for supplies." "I believe you," answered Emery, and that was no lie. The moment they stepped in here, the countless shelves were stocked with various potions, paste, herbs, powders, some of which were things he had never seen before in Granny's storeroom. He then said, "Let's make a deal." The alchemist then took out 10 coins from underneath his counter and placed them on the table. Emery, however, didn't touch nor look at them. Instead, he stared at the alchemist and said, "Actually, I wonder if I can trade these 10 coins with you for just an hour to check out your various herbs and maybe get some handful of them that you have in stock." The old man certainly didn't expect this answer from Emery, causing him to frown. He answered, "Are you thinking of stealing from me, boy? I have guards here who can throw you into the dungeon with just one order from me." Emery stood unshaken before shaking his head. "Please be assured that I am an honest person and would not dare to steal from you nor from anyone. It's just that I have been in awe the moment I stepped in here. Your wonderful collection of multitude of plants, potions, salves is just so rich that I couldn't help my curiosity. Please think of it as giving a lesson for a disciple in the art of alchemy. I will very much be grateful for your generosity." Lanzo, standing next to Emery, had his mouth agape as if words in his throat were lost in 1,000 languages. He was probably thinking his friend, Emery, might be the stupidest person he had ever met. While on the other hand, the old fat man coughed, slightly appearing a little red. The alchemist once more cleared his throat before picking up the coins, putting it back underneath the counter and saying, "Is that so? Okay. I'll let you check out my stock, but only for a short while. I'll be closing up the shop soon, and I still need to finish this concoction I'm brewing." Lanzo pulled Emery to the side and whispered, "What the hell are you doing? At least you'll be getting 10 coins instead of none. What benefit will you have by just taking a look at these herbs and potions?" "Don't worry, Lanzo, I've thought about this. Please wait for me," said Emery, but Lanzo still grumbled. "Alistair, come in here and watch this kid for a while," shouted the alchemist before heading into a different room with Emery. One of the guards outside entered the shop and said, "Understood," as Emery entered the back room, where there were more exotic-looking ingredients than the one in the main hall were stored. He tried his best to keep a straight face because inside him, his heart was actually jumping in joy at the prospect of getting more contribution points. "Go ahead, take a look, but again, don't you dare steal anything, especially right under my nose," said the alchemist. Emery nodded and proceeded to only touch the plant and activate his analyze spell on the plants he hadn't seen before. He made sure he used it only with either his back facing the expert or at least his palm couldn't be seen because it still glowed whenever he used it. He touched one of the plants that had pale green leaves and bright orange flowers. It looked more like a pretty flower in hindsight, but when Emery used his analyze spell on it, the following was listed: Unknown Analyze. Universal Flora Level 1 activated analyzing flora. Analyzation complete unidentified medicinal herb. Register to database for 1 contribution point. Yes, only a few moments had passed, but Emery had already found dozens of plants that weren't located in the Magus Academy's database. He asked if he could get some of them, especially the ones that he could feel some sort of energy flow with his plant affinity, and fortunately, the old man only allowed him to do so, but only a few of them. Emery plucked a stalk from each of the plants. The analyze skill had registered for more than 1 contribution because he would be using fragmentation later for additional points. He looked around further and seemed to have finished looking at all the plants, but not one of them was a rank 2 plant. For such a huge building and well-stocked shelves, he couldn't help but wonder, but ask, "Respected expert, is this all the plants you have?" "Of course not. And before you ask further, no, you are not allowed to pluck the more valuable ones nor see them," answered the alchemist sternly. This apothecary was located in the Lioness Kingdom's main city, which had dealings with other nations outside the continent of Britannia. Therefore, Emery was sure that there were more herbs than the current stock he had seen so far. Still, Emery knew he shouldn't push it because he still didn't have the full trust of this alchemist. Satisfaction came with patience, and in due time he would be allowed to check those out or maybe find some in the woods. For now, though, he was satisfied with what he had earned and grew more determined to explore that forbidden forest, where to find which plant the blue powder originated from. Speaking of the blue powder, just as Emery was about to leave this stockroom, an idea came into his mind. He went back to the old man, and the old man said, "What is it now, kid?" Emery reached his hand into his patchwork bag and fished out a blue-colored potion. The cleanse potion, it was a potion that could cure several diseases, and his analyzation skill deemed to have been safe for consumption. The moment Emery took it, for the first time, the alchemist appeared to be a bit surprised. "Give me that, kid," said the alchemist, grabbing the potion. He popped open the potion and gave it a smell. "It's a medicine that could treat poison, isn't it? But giving it another sniff, this is much stronger. Where did you get this, kid?" "I also concocted that. I deem it the name Cleanse Potion. It should be able to cure many types of diseases as well as fever in just a few days," answered Emery, recalling the description from the analyzed spell. The alchemist stared at Emery in disbelief, since he had proudly claimed himself being the best in the kingdom, and based on how seemed to stumble on his words, it looked like the description from the analyzed spell was accurate. The alchemist asked, "How much do you want for this?" Emery thought for a moment and said, "How I give you it for free," even though he would take a loss for giving this cleanse potion for free, and only had enough blue powder for about 2 more bottles of cleanse potion and 2 salves of strength paste. Emery thought this was a good investment. After all, Emery was sure he would return to this place some time again in the future, so he needed to create a bond and trust with this old man, hence the gift. The old man covered the lid of the potion and gave it back to Emery. "No, I refuse to accept anything for free. Tell me, what do you really want in exchange?" Emery smiled because his bait succeeded. "I understand. Then why don't we make another deal? As you have said, the price of a potion is decided upon the reputation of its maker. Honestly, I believe my healing paste and stamina potion is better than the one you have on the shelves, and I am sure you will find that to be true after you have tested it yourself and the people whom you will sell it to. With that in mind, I am hoping that you remember me once it sells with wonderful results. So, once I am back here, I am hoping to sell more for you in the future with higher prices, of course." The alchemist laughed hard. "You are hilarious, kid. All right, let's make that deal. I am accepting this potion. Now tell me, what's your name?" Not wanting people to know his name, Emery decided to make up a name similar to his. "You can call me Merlin." Chapter 70. After Emery successfully made a deal, the 2 youngsters went out of the apothecary and once more experienced the icy air. They didn't spend any more time frolicking around and headed straight to a nearby tavern. In truth, Emery wanted to use his spells for more contribution points, but there were orders to things he had to do. And right now, that was to find more information about the Marauders' chief, Prodigy, who had attacked the Ambrose family. As they walked on the ground, which was making a crisping sound, Emery said, "I think it's better you return to Jacob, Lanzo. I have something I need to do alone." Lanzo twisted his neck to get a clearer view of Emery. Emery hadn't noticed it, but his eyes had gone from warmth to cold. "No way, I am aware of what you're trying to do. I already see you as my brother, so you need someone to watch your back." Emery was taken aback at Lanzo's claims, before his eyes returned to the warmth it had earlier. Underneath his face covering, he smiled and said, "Okay, I hope you won't regret calling me brother." They entered one of the taverns located near the marketplace. Since winter had arrived, the taverns were filled to the brim. Those who came from the settlements outside the city decided to stay in places like this where it could protect them from the unforgiving weather outside. There were actually also people outside, hugging the wall just to get a bit of warmth. Hence, the laborers, the caretakers, the guardsmen, and the tavern keeper were busy as bees. "So, any ideas where to start?" asked Lanzo, leaning a bit to Emery while moving his eyes around. trying to decide what to do. In a tavern, there were generally two ways to obtain information. The tavern keeper whom the drunkards loved to share their stories with after being intoxicated, or the caretakers who always had an open ear for any juicy gossip occurring in the city. "Come on, follow me." Emery led Lanzo to the front counter and took a seat. He called for the tavern keeper. "Okay, tell me what is your preferred choice of drink, boys." "Let me guess, fresh milk." "Ha ha ha," said the bartender, while wiping a tankard with a ragged cloth. In the rowdy tavern, Emery recalled this was the first time he had visited such a place without his father's company, and during all those times he had always wanted to try drinking ale. He was about to order when spoke first. "Yes, 2 pots of milk for us," said Lanzo, grinning. The tavern keeper laughed to his heart's content, while Emery stood there feeling like complaining. "Ha ha ha, you are funny, young lads." Emery sighed as the tavern keeper put down the drinks Lanzo had ordered. Still, he let it go since ale wasn't his purpose in coming here anyway. He then asked the tavern keeper if he knew any person named Prodigy, but the answer was a resounding no. After finishing the drinks, Emery and Lanzo went to another tavern and asked the same questions. Apart from this time tasting the bitter ale which gave a warm feeling in their bellies, their venture to the second tavern time still ended up in failure, however. Walking on the road, Lanzo asked, "Are you sure you have the right name?" Emery nodded. "That's the name." Lanzo walked with his shoulders slumped and started yawning. Their adventure to the third and fourth tavern had the same results, and after walking out of the fifth tavern and finishing a tankard of ale, well, at least Lanzo, however, Emery felt like they were getting closer. Emery had noticed several people with cloaks since the fourth tavern, and he could tell they were following them. He then went to a corner, guiding the dizzy Lanzo, when the 2 cloaked figures showed up in the alleyway. The 2 cloaked figures blocked Lanzo, and Lanzo was immediately taken aback. "What do you want? Don't you dare to scream or I'll slit your throat," warned one of the men. 2 more appeared by the corner, and now all 4 had their swords drawn. "Hey, weren't there 2 of you? Where's the other one?" asked the man who had his sword close to Lanzo's neck. Lanzo looked to his left and right and appeared to be just as surprised as them. Emery had indeed disappeared. "Go search the corner, he might still be around," ordered the man. 2 men broke away, but after searching for the corners, they still couldn't find Emery. "Where is he?" demanded the man, pressing the sword closer. "I swear that I don't know," said Lanzo, raising both his hands. Emery was in fact just near them. With enhanced physical abilities, he was able to quickly get into another corner and climb on the roof of a nearby house to hide in the darkness of the night. "Forgive me, brother. I am actually glad because I truly needed your help. I hope you're not regretting this already," said Emery in his heart. The man sheathed his sword and spat on the ground. "Tch, you dimwits can't find a single boy. Let's head back to the safe house before anyone sees us." The 4 men then gave up searching for Emery in the dark night. There weren't that many torches in the streets, but the dim light from the stars and fire from the furnaces in the houses, exiting through the windows and holes, still provided some vision to the people walking on the ground. Hence, Emery was also able to follow the 4 people who were dragging Lanzo until they had arrived at an old, seemingly abandoned house. Emery carefully took into consideration what he was stepping on, and made sure he was in a position where he could listen in a good distance, while making sure no light source was coming his way. Inside the rickety house, there were 2 more people who were rolling dice and had a pouch of coins sitting on the table. One of them had a muscular build, while the other lacked the beefiness and was short instead. Regardless of the small man's appearance, the 4 men who had just walked in with a young lad became meek like sheep. "And who is this?" said the thin man, his voice cold. "Boss, this young lad has been walking around taverns looking for the chief," replied the man, throwing Lanzo before the thin man. The thin man, who appeared to be their leader, got off his chair and squatted in front of Lanzo and stabbed precisely on the small open space in between Lanzo's fingers. He grinded the small dagger back through the wooden flooring and pointed his knife to the panicking Lanzo. "Why are you looking for the chief? What is your purpose?" asked the thin man in a murderous tone. Emery was now positive these men were Padraig's marauders. As much as he wanted to storm in and demand where their hideout was, Emery held himself back and searched around with just his eyes for anything he could use. There were, after all, 6 of them and only one of him, probably 2, if he counted Lanzo, but whether he could beat all 6 people at once or not, he wasn't about to find out with nothing in his hand. Lanzo crawled back and placed his back against a wall. He exclaimed, "Please, please, I am just a village boy who happened to stumble upon the great name of the chief. I am looking for him to join his cause." Emery, who also had his back pressed against the wall of the rundown house, smiled to himself, since Lanzo didn't drop his name. Although he now felt a bit more guilty than before, he made excuses in his mind to convince himself this was necessary in order to achieve his goal, and would apologize later to Lanzo. "We don't accept skinny boys like you," said one of the marauders. "Just kill the kid." "Hold this," said the short man, giving the knife to the marauder next to him. He took a step toward the marauder who had just spoken and added, "Are you ordering?" "No, boss. I was just giving a suggestion, ha ha ha." "In that case," he then punched the marauder in the gut, "if you speak out of turn again, it's not my fist but this dagger will go into your innards. Do you understand?" said the boss. The marauder shakingly nodded. He turned back to Lanzo with the knife in his hands. "Young lad, I don't appreciate it when people are lying to me, especially on the night of our big operation." The boss smiled, and in a flash, he stabbed Lanzo's thigh. He twisted and turned it, making Lanzo scream at the top of his lung, "Tell me the truth, who sent you?" He pulled the bloody knife back and pointed it to one of his underlings. "You go outside and inform the teams that if they notice anything suspicious, all should immediately retreat here." "Got it." "Yes, boss," shouted the marauder, running out of the house. Lanzo curled into the corner and refused to speak. Hearing how Lanzo had screamed in pain, Emery knew this was time to act. Emery had dragged Lanzo into this, and it was his responsibility to bring him back. Not to mention, this seemed to be the only sole opportunity before the marauder came back with more people. So, he had to do this now and fast. Chapter 71. When Emery had broken through the middle stage of his plan affinity, he had subjected himself to even harder labor in Granny's garden. He hadn't only spent time concocting, caring for the plants, and sometimes looking for herbs, but also some physical tasks, which had become easier in time. And due to that, Emery's physical strength had increased in line with his elemental affinity breakthrough. Emery Ambrose, 16 years old, battle power 17. 12. Spirit power 32. 21. Although his battle power had surpassed way higher than that of the common man in its unlocked form, his current battle power was still above the average physical prowess of the general adult. Aside from raking in some experience in life and death battles, battling techniques of the Magus Academy, he still of course shouldn't face a battle head-on, especially with multiple marauders who made a living by stealing, fighting, and killing people with low chances of succeeding. Inside the old abandoned house, the 5 marauders stayed behind. The 3 appeared to be common thugs, and in hindsight, the biggest threat among them was probably the burly marauder, whose height almost reached the ceiling. As for the leader, Emery didn't know how to evaluate him, but since marauders usually base their rankings on strength and cunningness, this short man might actually be the deadliest of them all. Emery quickly racked his brain with different scenarios. Considering the fact that Lanzo probably couldn't stand up, he had to make sure he could deal with them swiftly and cleanly. In his heart, he wished for the symbol in his hand, to be able to measure the opponent's battle powers in front of him so he could analyze the situation better and release his full potential, but alas, not everything could be handed to him on a platter. In order to increase his chances of succeeding, Emery opened his bag and took out a small red-colored salve. He then loosened some cords that were holding his fur clothes together and immediately applied to his arms, forearms, thighs, and legs before tying the cords back. A warm sensation spread through the parts he had applied the strength paste on before feeling his muscles contracting and relaxing after. Another notification popped up in his mind that said his battle power had increased by a point. As he was about to head into battle, he remembered what his father had used to say. The outcome of a battle is determined by the preparation made beforehand. And this was what he was doing now. Since that was all he could do with the things he had on hand, he proceeded to the next phase of his plan. Emery picked up a stone lying on the ground just below him and threw it on the area of the ragged house that had trees nearby. What was that? The sound caught the attention of all the marauders inside. The short man added, "The two of you check it out." "Yes, boss," answered the two marauders. They first walked together, but with the darkness of the night one of them said, "I'll go this side and you check the other." "Okay." Emery waited patiently for the two marauders to be out of each other's sight, while he listened in to the conversation inside. Back in the room, the leader of the marauders said, "My patience is running thin." Again, the leader sunk the knife into Lanzo's other thigh. "I won't ask again. Why were you looking for our chief?" "Gra, please, enough. I already told you." Lanzo gritted his teeth as he grabbed onto his thigh, pulsing in pain. The remaining marauder, the one who had been punched, stepped in and said, "Be boss, if I may." "Speak," ordered the leader. When we followed this lad, there was another person with him. We're assuming he's also the same age, but he disappeared like thin air, said the remaining marauder. The leader extracted the knife as he stood up, startling the shaking marauder. "I see, so two boys want to join our ranks but are asking for our chief specifically," commented the leader. He looked back at Lanzo once more, his eyes extremely cold. "I'd have to be quite dumb if that's all your intent, right?" Outside of the ragged house, Emery made his move. The two marauders were now quite a distance to see each other clearly in the darkness of the night. If he were to attack inside, the probability of success was still low. So, divide and conquer, one of the time-proven successful strategies, was what Emery had decided to enact upon. He moved quietly but as fast as he could and knocked the marauder unconscious before snatching the sword. Emery said to himself, "Excellent, a sword that costs nothing. Lanzo, keep it together." He left the man lying there as he went back to his previous position. This was intentional, so when the second marauder shouted the moment he found his colleague, everyone in the house was alerted. "Jury is down, there is someone here." The boss sent the hulking marauder outside. Nothing less could be more than according to his plan, now that the most obvious threat had gone amongst the trees. With that said, Emery jumped into the open window and dashed to slash the closest marauder. The marauder's chest was ripped as he fell on the ground, groaning in pain. The situation had turned into 1 versus 1. Not wanting to miss his preemptive advantage, Emery shot forward at the leader of these marauders, but unexpectedly, he sidestepped Emery's blade. The short marauder wasn't perturbed even a bit, and just like what Emery had feared, a leader in a band of killers would always be above the others. "You came," cried Lanzo, hugging the ground. Emery hurriedly cut off the rope tied around Lanzo's, grabbed the sword of the marauder lying on the ground, and gave it to Lanzo. The two marauders outside seemed to have heard the commotion and went back into the ragged house. He then stepped back, Lanzo behind him, and placed his sword in front. It was now 3 against 1. Emery could see how Lanzo's thigh had been injured, blood peeking through the fur clothing. So he took out his healing salve and let Lanzo apply some of it into his wounds. For now, Emery wouldn't be expecting a person with an injured leg to fight. "Anyway, this is just funny. 2 young lads thought they had a chance against us. Ha, you better know what you are doing, boy. Nobody messes with the Crimson Fang and gets away with it," said the leader, taking a seat as if he was about to enjoy a show. "Shouldn't we just run while we can?" asked Lanzo, rubbing his wounds with the green paste. "You know you can't run," Emery said, carefully watching the two marauders, especially the marauder whose height almost touched the ceiling. He was, however, as calm as still water, although the height and the protruding muscle of that marauder far exceed anyone he had seen so far. There was no comparison that could be made against the menacing orcs. Quite on the contrary, there was a tinge of happiness that the leader had blurted out the name of their group, Crimson Fang, and the chief was confirmed to be Padraig. "Just stay low and try to keep out of sight for now," Emery said when the hulking marauder lunged at him with a big sword on hand. Emery tried to meet it, but he was knocked back 3 steps. Instead, evidently, he messed up. He became too confident, thinking his strength could match against this giant man. "Stop wasting time, Gondo," said the leader of the marauder. Gondo grunted and tried to raise his sword once again, but it touched the ceiling. Still, he hacked the large sword to Emery, and Emery ducked. The sword got stuck in the window pane from where Emery had entered. Emery then pierced straight into Gondo's chest, but out of nowhere, Gondo's fist appeared on the corner of Emery's eyes, and immediately pulled back his extended sword to try and block the fist. The unexpected fist threw Emery flying, but as he remembered the positioning of the marauders, he twisted his body and stretched his sword once more, hitting a marauder who was moving towards Lanzo. The sword went through the guts, making the marauder fall on the ground dead. A few seconds later, the poor guy didn't see it coming. The leader laughed before saying, not bad at all. We would have loved to see you fight in the pits more, but unfortunately this party is over. You have no chance against Gondo. Gondo, finish this boy." Emery tugged the bloodied sword and got ready for the large marauder who had just pulled out the sword from the wooden window's pane. Looking around, Emery searched for more opportunities. There were only a table, some chairs, and a pouch of coins sitting on top of the table. Just as he was about to make the first move this time, the thudding of footsteps echoed from the distance, and from the sound of it, there were more than one pair of feet running on the damp soil. The marauder who had left earlier returned with more of his mates. Chapter 72. As multiple footsteps were approaching the ragged house, Emery ran back to where Lanzo was and stood in front. It didn't take long for him and Lanzo to be surrounded, for 2 more marauders came inside, bringing the total threats to 5. His preemptive strike had failed. Things had turned from difficult into nearly impossible. The marauder who had just arrived gave news to their leader, making the leader frown before saying, "Men, it appears our operation has been compromised. Let's finish this mess as soon as possible so we could leave the city." Meanwhile, Emery cracked his brain once more, trying to find the plan to get out of this problem. The best move was obviously to run away as soon as possible and save himself. But he was not that type of person, sacrificing the others for the sake of himself. That was not who he was. Not to mention, he himself had planned for this in the first place. Hence, he needed to find a way to keep Lanzo safe, as well as not die in the process. Emery's eyes fell on the table once more. An idea popped in his head as he dashed toward the table, grabbed the coin pouch, and threw it to the marauder who had just arrived. The solid thud of the heavy coin pouch, which seemed to have been filled with several coins, knocked out the marauder cold. He also quickly turned over the table to make some safe space between him and Lanzo. The hulking marauder would have more space to work with, but so did he. But having some sort of shield over Lanzo would at least take off some pressure in protecting him. Finally, Emery raised his sword, ready to face whatever coming at him. The leader of the marauders didn't seem that bothered, as he simply said, "I don't know if you're just that stupid or brave, boy, but there's a thin between the two. In any case, I've thought about you joining our crew. Of course, that's after both of you are dead, haha." A couple more marauders entered the house, and Emery was besieged from all sides. Gondo stood in the middle while the rest stood on the flanks, making sure Emery wouldn't be able to circle around them easily. Lanzo attempted to stand up with the table as his support, but taking even just one step caused him to groan and fall in pain. "Go, you know I'm a lost cause. I won't be able to run, save yourself. Now I'll hold them off. I'm getting tired of both of your idiocy. Men, finish them," said the leader as he stood up and pointed his dagger at them. Gondo tried to lead the charge, but the moment everyone moved 1 foot forward, the clashing of metals and the screaming of marauders outside entered the ragged house. Then the door swung open as a bloodied marauder holding his stomach came in. "A knight has arrived," said the wounded marauder, but he fell down on the ground a second later as a man with bluish eyes, long hair, white armor, and red robe appeared behind, holding a blood-stained sword. His red robe, which symbolizes the lioness kingdom, fluttered in the air as the cold breeze from the front lawn entered the house. He stood calm and collected and surveyed the surroundings before flicking his sword to get rid of the blood. It's just a knight. Take care of him first, men, said the leader of the marauders. The marauders who were on Gondo's flank switched stances and charged the long-haired man, but the knight's sword movement simply passed them as if he became a blur for the marauders. Emery, however, could see each parries and swings of the knight's sword made in conjunction with precise footwork before finally delivering a thrust right in between their chests and shoulders, leaving them alive but incapacitated. The battle between the marauders and the knight was over before anyone knew it. Emery gulped. He wasn't sure if he'd be able to match that, but right now he knew he wouldn't be able to hold a candle. All the marauders who had attacked the knight fell while grimacing in pain on the ground. Some of them still tried to stand up and fight, but those who had resisted didn't receive a second chance. "Gondo, take care of him," shouted the leader of the marauder. Gondo charged with his large sword held horizontally on his waist, but a deafening roar from the outside shocked everyone to their cores. A large furried figure with rich golden mane entered the fray and met Gondo's sword with its fangs. A lion had appeared. The lion's large teeth and Gondo's sword clashed, but Gondo seemed to be losing ground. The leader of the marauder took a step back and shakingly said, "No. Why you're Yvain, the Knight of the Lion." The name rang a bell in Emery's mind. He had heard tales of this knight's name, for it was he who had been often compared with his father, Geoffrey, the Lion's Fang. Emery had also heard stories from his father on how this guy was a force to be reckoned with in the battlefield. He had asked his father to meet with this person several times, but his father had never introduced him. Right now, this famous knight standing nearby the door was the current Lioness Kingdom's best swordsman. It wasn't only his sword skills that made him popular throughout the kingdom, though. Partially, it was because of the exotic and unique companion that no else had except for him. Lion, the leader of the marauders' face, seemed to have lost all its color after identifying who this knight was. "Gondo, be by me some time." After saying that, the short and thin marauder turned tail while Gondo tried to have a bout of strength against the big lion. But Gondo couldn't contest it as he also dropped on the ground, crushed under the weight of the lion before being mauled into bits and pieces. It was no longer a fight when the leader of the marauder tried to run away in fear, only to be pounced by the lion who had just finished ripping Gondo, whose arms and legs now were all over the place. "Halt!" commanded Yvain to his companion just before its fangs touched the marauder's leader's face. The lion left its paw on the leader's chest, and Yvain pointed his sword and said, "Surrender, and order your men to drop their weapons." The moment those words left Yvain's lips, more marauders came in from the direction the leader was about to head to, but of course, they were late to the battle. "Do as he asks, men," said the leader, and one by one all the marauders who had just arrived threw their weapons across the wooden floor. A girl's voice sounded behind the door and asked, "Is it done, Sir Yvain?" "Yes, Princess. The place is now secured," said Yvain with a bow, and then wiped his sword with a cloth before sheathing it. Chapter 73. About 12 hours earlier in Lionark. Inside a gorgeous room where beautiful golden red curtains hung from the ceiling and windows and crimson carpets adored the floor, a beautiful blonde girl was standing by the room's balcony looking out over the ocean. The riches and beauty of the inside room couldn't compare to adventures she continued to imagine outside of the vast and open world. She sighed to herself as she thought about the events that had transpired these past 4 months. On the night of her coming of age, she had cut off ties with the only friend whom she had shared her dreams of venturing the wondrous world. But thoughts of him soon faded into something else, as she became embroiled in the world of politics, which her father, the king, was pushing her into. Somehow being preoccupied with courtly duties, council meetings, and kingdom activities had kept her mind off some of the unwanted things her father had introduced to her now that she was considered as an adult. Suitors. Her father kept meeting with many envoys from different kingdoms that had arrived in their palace wishing to tie their kingdom with the lioness. A new kind of unhappiness sprang within herself, even though she knew this was one of her duties, as the princess of the Lioness Kingdom. In some days, she was required to stay by her father's side, as envoys from other kingdoms went to see her. Of course, she knew what these meetings meant. In the larger scale of kingdom politics, this was only done to achieve one end purpose, and that was marriage. Arranged marriages between kingdoms were a common practice for princes and princesses. After all, there was no other more powerful political tool than marrying a daughter to another kingdom, in order to strengthen the nobility as well as keep the royal blood amongst themselves. It would bring a lot of benefits to both kingdoms, but as for Gwen, the thought of being locked in a palace was the most repulsive thing she could ever imagine. The time she had used to spend outside became less and less as her father and the royal advisor gave orders not to let her out of the palace, especially without supervision. Just like what she had thought, since she was the only one who had royal blood who would continue the line of her father's legacy. Whatever freedom she had before was now like a far-away dream. She understood it was her sole duty as the princess of a kingdom. Still, it was not the thing she wished for. It wouldn't be wrong to say she hadn't dreamt of being courted by a handsome prince, or a charming knight on a white horse, making decisions for the better of her people, but her true passion lay elsewhere. It was to ride off to the sunset on her own horse and be on an adventure, just like what she had shared to that boy. Now she could vaguely recall his face, but 3 months ago she had heard about the tragic fate of the Ambrose estate. News of it spread like wildfire, and because the Ambrose estate had once homed one of the finest knights in the Lioness Kingdom, the result was that more marauder groups became bolder and started raiding more settlements. The king had responded with more patrol guards along the roads and tasked some knights and soldiers to eradicate the threats, but Gwen knew that wouldn't be enough. So, on her own accord, she had tasked some people and delegated her personal knight to protect her beloved people from being terrorized. And during yesterday's audience with the king, one particular plea for help caught Gwen's attention. A representative from the many settlements that had arrived in the capital city requested for protection against those thugs and crooks who had been extorting them after exchanging their yearly tribute for coins. Again, her father, the king, responded with the generic, "I'll let the garrison commander know about your situation," and from that moment, she knew she had to do something. Luckily, on that same day, Yvain returned and reported to Gwen that he had received information that a marauder group had entered the city and was planning some big operation the night after. With that in mind, she became determined to capture and eradicate those city rats who had been poisoning her people today. Her door issued a knock, and quickly several handmaidens entered her room. "Prepare my combat gear," said Gwen. After receiving a look of shock from her handmaidens, they quickly composed themselves and nodded before proceeding to help Gwen wear her preferred outfit. Evening arrived, and a group of knights and several garrison soldiers, led by Sir Yvain, started searching for any out-of-the-norm activities in the Lionarch city. "Princess, I beg that you reconsider joining us. It's too dangerous," said Sir Yvain. "No, I need to be here. I want to see it firsthand. These hateful people are damaging my people's lives," retorted Gwen. "But I won't have no as an answer. Anyway, the order is not to go outside unsupervised. With you there, I am not breaking any of the rules," said Gwen. With that being said, Sir Yvain complied with the princess and made sure she would be staying safe beside him or on the back line. Within hours, they had managed to capture and eliminate dozens of them. Then one of their scouts returned and reported the location of an abandoned house where there seemed to be an unusual amount of people heading toward. Sir Yvain's group of knights and garrison soldiers came bursting in that area, and within minutes, they had completely subjugated the whole area. "You all better surrender now," demanded Yvain, and just like that the operation was a big success. "Is it done, Sir Yvain?" "Yes, princess. The place is now secure." The knights tied ropes to all the evildoers and had them sit in the front lawn of the ragged house. Princess Gwen then heard that this group in particular belonged to the Crimson Fang, and like a flash in her mind, she recalled a person. Gwen approached the short man who had been identified as their leader and said, "You're part of the Crimson Fang, aren't you?" If so, then you should be behind the attack of the Ambrose estate. Tell me now, was there a boy? Did you guys kill him?" The small man had actually been half blue by some of the garrison soldiers. He wasn't in the right state of mind, so he said, "What? A boy? Yes, the boy's in there." "We didn't kill him." Gwen's eyes widened as she hurriedly asked, "He's there?" "Yes." After hearing that, Gwen's heart started pounding and asked Sir Yvain about a boy who had been captured by the Crimson Fang. Sir Yvain then led her to the boy and said, "That's him, princess." As she laid eyes on him, at first she thought saw Emery's face, but when the light of the torch landed on Brighter, she sighed. It wasn't him. "What's your name?" she asked. "My name is Lanzo, your highness," said Lanzo, keeping his head down. "I see. In any case, I'm sorry we didn't get to you in time. Sir Yvain, please have someone cater to his wounds," said Gwen. She didn't know what had gotten into her, but after she thought more about it, that boy she wished to see should have been dead by now. Chapter 74. Emery noticed the clashing outside and had an inkling it was time to go. The marauders were distracted by the new marauder arrivee bringing news about a knight who was just outside. If this was the case, it wouldn't be long that the royal troops would come crashing into the ragged house and arrest everyone they would see, except perhaps for Lanzo. He quickly kneeled to Lanzo and said, "You're going to be safe now, I have to go." But Emery barely heard what Lanzo had said afterward, because he had just jumped out of the window when a thud of something dropping on the wooden floor sounded. He heard a person inside the ragged house say, "Drop your weapons and surrender now." What soon came after were more clashing metals and a deafening roar of a beast. Emery heard how much panic was contained in the voice of the leader as he yelled, "Yvain, the Knight of the Lion." Emery moved a bit further toward the trees, but the sight of the inside was still visible. In his heart, Emery was a bit relieved that he had been able to slip away just before Yvain arrived. He was sure that Yvain would recognize him, despite half of his face being covered with a fur cloak, and that would spell a terrible future for him if ever someone else within the nobility found out he was still alive. Emery was about to run deeper into the dark wood when a familiar voice caught his attention, making him stop his tracks. He sneakily hid behind the trees, and there he saw a young woman, wearing beautiful red battle armor with a lion emblem embroidered on her shoulder, standing behind a couple of knights. His heart skipped a beat seeing Gwen in her warsuit, and for a moment he felt the urge to tell her all the things he had experienced, all the highs and the lows. It felt like forever since he had talked to her. Once more, he used the shadows of the trees as cover and moved closer to try and eavesdrop why there were here. He was surprised by the words that came out of Gwen's mouth. "You're part of the Crimson Fang, aren't you? If so, then you should be behind the attack of the Ambrose estate. Tell me now, was there a boy named Emery? Did you guys kill him?" Gwen said. Emery's heart trembled when he heard her say those. He unconsciously reached out his hand when a buried memory of her ran a scene in his mind. "We can't be friends anymore, Emery." That single sentence froze his whole being, unable to move. He clenched his fist, thinking to himself he should hold back. It wasn't the time yet. He took back and accidentally stepped on a dead branch. A knight turned his head on toward Emery's location and drew a sword while walking slowly. Emery knew he had messed up. He shouldn't be caught or seen here. Not now, especially with Gwen being nearby. Emery turned around and ran as fast as he could, his mind filled with Gwen's words, both the painful memory along with questions why she was looking for him. He couldn't tell how far he had run away, but at very least, he was sure that the knight who had caught notice of him should have stopped chasing by now. As he pondered her words and based on how she sounded, he tried to think of every reason he could logically come up with, but not a single one of them managed to convince him. Still, deep down, a hint of joy sprang inside him at the knowledge of Gwen looking for him, despite about 2 seasons having passed, and no matter was the reason. Not wanting to think any deeper, he placed the matter in the back of his head once more and continued on with his escape. The night was coming to an end, with layers of light lifting the curtains of darkness, welcoming the kingdom's people with a new day. Lanzo arrived at the inn, escorted by the knights to where Jacob was. The princess's knights even gave him a bag of coins as compensation for his trouble. When Jacob came out of the inn in his sleeping clothes, the shock on his face couldn't be more as plain as day when he saw Lanzo's covered in bandages from the waist down. Lanzo smiled sheepishly and simply explained he had quite an adventure that night. After getting rid of Jacob's talk, Lanzo quickly used the coin to celebrate his near-death experience with his newfound love for ale. Emery went down and gave Lanzo a brotherly hug. He was somewhat glad that Lanzo didn't hold a grudge against him, but he still had to reject Lanzo's offer, since he wasn't in a celebratory mood to drink. His mind was still filled with thoughts of Gwen, and after seeing her once more, her new image, as well as seeing Sir Yvain's swift swordsmanship, his desire to become stronger burned even more violently. Last night's experience was proof that he was still far from being able to hold his own life, let alone take revenge for his family. Ever since his childhood, he had always dreamed of being a knight just like Yvain and his late father Geoffrey, fighting valiantly for his kingdom. Unfortunately, his physical condition didn't allow him to do that before, but now, after receiving benefits from the Magus Academy and future possible benefits, he was confident he'd eventually surpass all his enemies. They spent another day in Lionark to give Lanzo more time to heal up, and as soon as the next day arrived, only Emery and Jacob were standing in front of the horse carts. They had decided it was time to go back home in Mistshire, but when they woke up earlier, Lanzo was once more missing. After half an hour of waiting, in the distance they saw a person carrying a large package strapped on his back heading their way. That was Lanzo. Old man Jacob had a great huge frown as he shouted, "Damn kid, aren't you injured? Where have you been?" "Bought some things for the villagers with the leftover coins from yesterday," answered Lanzo with a wide smile, placing the package on the horse cart. "What kind of things?" Jacob asked, examining the packages. "You know, things that the villagers don't have," Lanzo answered with a cheeky smile. "What things, you rascal? Let me kick you for making me wait for so long." "No, don't. Ah, my legs, said Lanzo, acting as if he was hurting all over again. Emery laughed so hard that he could his ribs hurting, before asking them to stop. As soon as things settled down, the three of them traveled back to Mistshire. On the way, Lanzo talked incessantly about the stuff he had bought for the villagers, particularly how he had bought a special hand-knitted coat for Granny. Emery listened attentively to Lanzo, while grinding the sword with a whetstone, and checked his bag filled with plants with a smile on his face. Due to their late departure because of someone's fault, the group of two youngsters and old man arrived at Mistshire when the sky was already dark. "Brother, look, the moon in the sky," exclaimed Lanzo, pointing up. Emery raised his head and witnessed a sight that he had only seen once in his life. The dark heaven was devoid of stars. Only the crimson moon, known as the blood moon, decorated the empty sky. For some reason, Emery's heart began pounding against his chest as he realized only now that the surrounding was also lacking of life. He then turned his head to Jacob, who also appeared as confused as he. "What happened?" Emery asked. "This isn't right. I know we're late, but why isn't there anyone, not even hunters, guarding by the gate? They still should be expecting us even if we're a day behind." Jacob explained. Chapter 75. The horse-drawn wagon swayed on the rocky entrance of the Mistshire settlement as it passed by the wooden gate. All three of them were stretching their necks to see even a hint of a lit campfire, or even a silhouette of a person. "Wow, what's happening? Where's everyone?" exclaimed Lanzo, putting the wagon to a stop. He jumped out and hurriedly headed toward the nearest hut. "Jacob!" Emery called out as he also got out of the second wagon and went after the old man. Lanzo followed suit, although a bit limping behind, but the two youngsters had drawn their swords, in case of any danger that might head their way. "Hey, is anyone there?" Jacob's muffled shouting exited the hut, but only the eerie silence replied. In return, Emery almost bumped into Jacob, but Jacob didn't mind him not one bit as he entered another hut. Emery and Lanzo entered the second hut, where Jacob seemed to have already turned inside. Upside down, but just like the first one, aside from the mess Jacob had created, everything that seemed to be of value stayed untouched. Did the marauders attack? Emery asked, waving the torch around for better visibility. I don't think that's the case. There aren't any horse tracks or signs of fighting, this looks like. Lanzo didn't finish his words when Jacob suddenly shouted, Daisy, Greg, where are you? Anyone? Can you hear me, please? Jacob this time pushed his way against Emery and Lanzo and proceeded to check more huts. The population of Miss Thayer should be around 30 people, but after searching about a dozen or so huts, even a single soul was nowhere to be seen. Jacob then sat on the ground, trying to catch his breath. He stutteringly said, "We must have passed them along the way. Ha ha ha. TTT, they must have gone to another village. Yeah, that's PP probably it." Emery knew these words were just words of comfort, and although he had barely known these people, he himself was starting to feel his heart pounding against his chest. His thoughts then were drowned out as Lanzo spoke. "Let's go, there's still one place we haven't checked out yet," Lanzo said, giving a knowing look at Emery, and Emery nodded in reply. Lanzo's words had only meaning, Granny's place. Unlike the rest of the Miss Shire settlers, Granny's hut was located at the farthest edge of the settlement near the trees. Emery then followed Lanzo's limping, hurried steps with the torch, only providing the faintest of light from the darkness that seemed to be wanting to swallow them alive. As the two youngsters neared Granny's hut, a faint moving shadow and the sound of digging entered their perceptions. They headed toward the unknown, and when they got there, the shadow of a man was scooping the earth with what appeared to be a shovel. Emery shone the burning torch on the person and saw Obed, one of the Miss Shire settlers, who seemed to be out of sorts. Emery walked over and just when about to ask Obed questions, the light of the torch illuminated the huge burial ground. His eyes widened at the sight as his gut churned and pushed up an acidic feeling inside of him wanting to get out. Only then did the foul stench of what should have been the smell of rotting corpses for weeks registered in his nose. Elderly men and women, adult men and women, both young and old, all of whom made up of the Miss Shire settlement, appeared to be the whole. They all appeared to have been dried up and aged, only keeping the bones and the white hues of the eyes. Lanzo had just caught up to Emery, and when it was his turn to see, he fell to knees and vomited a greenish, foamy barf. What? How? Lanzo said, heaving hard while wiping his mouth. Jacob arrived not long after and had the same reaction. Emery fought off the urge to cover his nose. He opened his mouth to ask Obed what had happened while they were away, but decided against it and let the man continue to dig in tears. Just when Emery turned toward the hut, the door opened and Granny stepped out. In a moment's notice, Obed had already thrown away the shovel and ran toward Granny. "How is my wife?" Obed kneeled and grabbed Granny's robes, but the old woman kept silent and shook her head. Her eyes exhibited deep sadness as she watched Obed, who was now wailing and hugging his poor wife inside her hut. Jacob stood before Granny and asked, "What happened? Is everyone?" Granny sighed heavily as she took a seat. Her shoulders slumped as she explained that when the three had left, everyone in the settlement started exhibiting coughing, which spread within just hours. Granny worked non-stop brewing potion, but despite her best efforts, one by one, the residents soon became unable to move and died. Lanzo, standing beside Emery, had a grim expression as if he had remembered something terrible. He said, "These symptoms. Granny, please don't tell me it's following us." Granny shook her head once more and buried her face in her hands. From that, Emery could tell it was the same disease that Lanzo's family had suffered. More on that, however, it seemed that the same thing had happened during their almost 2 years of travel. Granny then stood up and rummaged through the countless bottles before finding 3 bottles with greenish content and asked the 4 men to drink the potion. "Even though you weren't here when it happened, it's better to drink this potion as a prevention. This will help you to resist the disease," she said while handing the potions to them. Lanzo and Jacob chugged the potion without delay, but somehow for Emery, the back of his head was screaming that there seemed to be something out of place. He stared at the green potion when a wild idea flashed through his mind. He trembled and then looked at Granny, whose saddened eyes earlier now seemed to have disappeared altogether. "What's wrong, dear? Drink it, it should be good for you, urged Granny.